What's up, guys? Welcome to Harryverse X. We've got something special today. What if John Wick found Harry at Godric's Hollow and Continental raised him as High Table's first wizard assassin? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's dive in. Chapter 1, The Night of Falling Stars. The contract had been simple. That was the first problem. In John Wick's experience, simple contracts had a way of developing opinions about themselves halfway through execution, and this one had been no different. The target, a mid-level Bratva enforcer who'd made the mistake of skimming from a High Table affiliate's casino operation in Bristol, had decided that dying in Bristol wasn't to his taste and had relocated to a small village in Somerset called Godric's Hollow. Why a Russian mob enforcer had chosen to spend his final hours in a village that looked like it had been designed by someone with a postcard obsession, John hadn't known and hadn't particularly cared. He'd finished the contract at 11:47 p.m. Clean. No witnesses, no collateral, no complications. That had been the second problem. The night wasn't done with him yet. He was cutting through the village square, heading for the car he'd left on the B3151, 2 miles out, because parking in picturesque Somerset villages was apparently a concept that English urban planners had decided was too modern, when he heard it. Not a sound exactly. More like the absence of one. The kind of silence that falls over a place after something catastrophic has happened, when even the birds have the sense to stay quiet and the wind makes itself scarce. John stopped walking. He stood in the square for a moment, rain beginning to come down in the particular English way that suggested it hadn't really decided yet, and looked toward the source of the silence. A cottage on the far end of the lane. Or what was left of one. The upper floor was simply gone, blown outward, the timbers splayed like broken ribs, smoke still rising from the wreckage in thin grey columns. One wall remained standing, defiant and stupid, holding up nothing. John's hand moved to the Glock at his hip. Force of habit. He walked toward it. The gate was hanging off one hinge, iron twisted like someone had grabbed it and pulled with a strength that had nothing to do with muscles. The garden path was cracked down the middle, the stones shoved aside by something that had come up through the earth, and the roses along the left border were all dead, not wilted, not frost-killed, but dead in the way that things go when whatever animates them decides it's done and leaves all at once. The front door was open. John went through it sideways, checking corners out of reflex, and stopped. The ground floor was mostly intact. A sitting room to the left, sofa overturned, books scattered, a child's toy broom lying near the fireplace in a way that suggested it had been thrown rather than dropped. A kitchen visible through a doorway ahead. Normal. Terrifyingly normal for a house whose second floor had just been removed from the equation. There was a man on the floor of the sitting room. John crossed to him in 4 steps and crouched. Male, 30s, dark hair, round glasses lying 2 feet from his outstretched hand. Robes, actual robes, which was strange, but John had worked contracts in stranger dress codes, dark blue, expensive fabric, now ruined beyond any dry cleaner's ambition. No pulse. No visible wound. His face was still arranged in the expression of someone who'd been standing between something and something else and had known exactly what that meant and done it anyway. John looked at him for 3 seconds. Then he stood. There was a woman at the foot of the stairs. Red hair. The kind of red that looks like it was painted by someone who wanted to make a point about it. She was young, too young for the particular piece on her face, which was the piece of someone who'd already done the most important thing they were ever going to do and was done now. Her arms were still half raised. Whatever she'd been doing with them when it happened, she'd been doing it forward, not back. John straightened, jaw tight. The stairs were intact. He went up them, gun still out, stepping over a broken baluster on the 4th step and ducking through a doorway that now had open sky where its ceiling used to be. Rain was coming down properly now, tapping against the scorched floorboards, and somewhere in the city of London a radio was probably playing something cheerful and completely inappropriate. The room had been a nursery. There was still enough of it left to tell, a mobile of golden snitches hanging inexplicably undisturbed from a ceiling joist that was one bad gust away from joining the rest of the debris on the ground below, a blanket with cartoon owls on it tangled in the corner, a crib. The crib was still standing. John lowered his gun. The boy in the crib was maybe 15 months old, if John was judging right, which he was. He'd done enough protective details involving families to calibrate the size of small humans with some accuracy. He was sitting up, which was impressive given that everything around him had expressed a strong preference for lying down. He had a blanket pulled up to his chest and a look on his face that was less terrified and more extremely disgruntled, like someone had interrupted something important and he was reserving judgment on whether to cry about it. He had a cut on his forehead. Fresh, still bleeding sluggishly, shaped like a lightning bolt with a precision that no wound had any business having. Like something had written it there. John stood at the edge of the crib and looked at the kid. The kid looked back at him. The kid had green eyes. Vivid, unusual green, the kind of color that felt like it was doing something more than just being a color. The rain came down. "Hi," John said, because he didn't have anything better. The boy stared at him with the serious, evaluating focus of someone conducting an interview. Then he reached up with one small hand and grabbed John's gun hand by the index finger. John looked down at the small hand around his finger. He looked back up at the boy. The boy had apparently decided the interview was concluded and was now examining John's trigger finger with the focused interest of a very small, very determined researcher. John's phone buzzed in his coat pocket. He answered it with his free hand. "It's done," he said. "I know." Winston's voice, smooth and even as good whiskey poured over ice. "The package was confirmed 20 minutes ago. There's also been a rather remarkable amount of unusual activity in the area. Explosive decompression of a residential structure, energy readings our people can't quite categorize. Are you nearby?" John looked at the open sky where the ceiling had been. He looked at the dead couple downstairs. He looked at the boy with the lightning bolt on his forehead and John's finger in his grip. "I'm at the structure." A pause. "And?" John opened his mouth. Closed it. The boy had stopped examining the finger and was now looking up at John's face with an expression of profound patience, like he'd decided that whatever happened next, he could wait. "There's a kid," John said. Another pause, longer this time. Winston was never surprised, he was occasionally interested, which for Winston was the same thing wearing better clothes. "How old?" "Young. A year, maybe a bit more." "Survivors?" "No." The rain came down harder. The mobile of golden snitches turned gently in a draft from the ruined wall, each little sphere catching the light from the fire still smoldering in the wreckage outside and throwing it around the room in slow circles. "Leave him," Winston said. Not cruelly. Just practically, the way Winston said most things. "Someone will find him. These are unusual people, they'll have systems for this." "Yeah," John said. He didn't move. "John. I heard you." The boy made a sound. Not crying, a questioning sound, the vocal equivalent of well, small and imperious and directed entirely at John's face. John looked at the cut on his forehead. It had stopped bleeding, which was strange, because head wounds didn't do that on their own, especially not in children, especially not that fast. The edges of the cut were already closing, knitting together with an efficiency that a trauma surgeon would have found upsetting. He thought about the man downstairs. The position of his body, standing between. The woman at the bottom of the stairs, arms forward, giving everything. He thought about the specific quality of the silence he'd heard from across the square, the silence that falls when something irreversible has just happened. He reached into the crib and picked the boy up. The boy didn't protest. He grabbed a fistful of John's coat lapel instead, got a solid grip, and apparently considered the matter settled. "I'm taking the kid," John said into the phone. A very long pause. John was walking back toward the stairs, carefully, one arm supporting the boy's weight, gun still in his other hand because the night was still the night. "John." Winston's voice had shifted slightly. Not concerned, exactly. More the tone of a man who could see several moves ahead and was internally debating whether to say so. "That is a significant complication." "I know. A child is not, I know, Winston." "You are not." Winston stopped himself. "Start it again. This will require considerable arrangement." "Then start arranging." John reached the bottom of the stairs, stepped over the woman with the red hair without looking at her face, and moved toward the front door. "I'll be at the car in 20 minutes. A pause, and then the sound of Winston Scott doing what Winston Scott always did when faced with the unreasonable, pivoting to make it reasonable. "The Continental New York has a suite on the residential floor. I'll have it prepared. Sharon will need to be, Winston." "Yes. Thank you." The word cost John something. Winston understood that, which was why he didn't make anything of it. "Drive carefully," Winston said, and ended the call. John stood in the doorway of the ruined cottage and looked out at the rain and the village and the dark, quiet English countryside that had absolutely no idea what had just happened inside one of its postcards. The boy in his arm had his fist full of coat and his chin on John's shoulder and was looking back at the room they'd just left with an expression that was too old for his face, serious and unreadable and strangely ungrieving, like he understood something about the nature of the moment that he hadn't had the language for yet. John felt something shift in his chest. Not dramatically. Not like a revelation. Just a small, structural shift, like a wall that's been standing in the wrong place for a long time finally being taken down. He walked out through the broken gate and into the rain. Behind them, somewhere in the wreckage of the upper floor, a piece of timber finally gave up its argument with gravity and came down. The mobile of golden snitches swung in the falling dust, spinning faster, throwing light in all directions until there was no one left to see it. The car was a black Jaguar, which John had chosen for the job because the English countryside in 1981 was not short on black Jaguars and it fit the environment. He put the boy in the passenger seat, belted him in with the seatbelt modified into something that would actually work for someone the boy's size, which required 2 minutes of creative engineering with a spare bungee cord from the boot, and drove. The boy fell asleep somewhere on the A303, one hand still loosely holding the fabric of John's sleeve. John drove and didn't think about what he was doing, because thinking about what he was doing would require acknowledging that he had absolutely no plan, no framework, and no business raising a child, and he'd already made the decision, so thinking about it now was just a way of making himself feel bad without changing anything. He'd learned that particular lesson the hard way, in a kitchen in New York, over a different kind of loss that had also been irreversible. He stopped once, at an all-night petrol station outside Wincanton. The man behind the counter was reading a tabloid with the kind of focused dedication that suggested he'd been at it for several hours and hadn't yet found the interesting bit. John bought water, a packet of plain biscuits, and, after a moment's assessment of the small figure asleep in the front seat, a bag of crisps and a chocolate bar, which he understood children consumed, though the specifics of the dietary requirements of a 15-month-old were somewhat outside his operational expertise. The tabloid's front page was already making excited noises about something. John caught the headline as he turned to go, WHO vanquished. And then something about a boy, but the man was turning the page to the sports section and the rest was gone. John looked at his car through the petrol station window. The boy was visible through the windscreen, small head tipped sideways, still asleep. You know who vanquished. He thought about the lightning bolt on the boy's forehead, now mostly closed, and the particular precision of it. He thought about the way the cottage had felt, not bombed, not burned, but unmade in some fundamental way, like the forces involved hadn't been physical at all. He thought about the man standing between and the woman with her arms forward. Then he put the thought away, because thinking about what it meant would complicate the drive, and he was already committed to complicating his life considerably more than that. He got back in the car. The boy was awake. He was looking at John with those green eyes, clear and direct, and he had somehow gotten into the crisp bag, which was physically impossible given that John had put it in the back seat. John looked at the crisp bag. He looked at the boy. He looked at the empty back seat. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Okay." The boy ate a crisp with enormous satisfaction and offered John one, which John accepted. They drove the rest of the way to London in what passed for comfortable silence. Winston Scott met them in the lobby of the Continental at 2 in the morning, which was not unusual because Winston was always in the lobby of the Continental, or if he wasn't, he appeared there when required, which amounted to the same thing. He was wearing a perfectly pressed charcoal suit that no reasonable hour had any right to see, and his expression, as John walked through the glass doors with a sleeping toddler against his shoulder, was the expression of a man who had anticipated many things in his long career and had not specifically anticipated this. "Well," Winston said. "Winston. Winston tilted his head with the look of a man revising his estimates. "Smaller than I'd pictured. He's 15 months old." "Yes, I imagine most 15-month-olds are." Winston stepped forward, examining the boy with genuine, careful interest. "The forehead. I know. That's not a normal wound. I know. It closed itself. I know, Winston." Winston straightened, hands clasped behind his back, and looked at John with the measured, penetrating regard that had been making powerful people extremely uncomfortable for 3 decades. "You understand what you've done? I picked up a child from a destroyed house. You've removed a child from a world that will come looking for him. And that world," Winston paused. "Based on what my people have been able to gather in the last 2 hours, that world is currently in the middle of something rather extraordinary. The boy appears to be significant to them." "Significant how?" Winston made a small gesture that meant the details are still incoming but the shape of it is clear. "There's a prophecy. There's a Dark Lord who's apparently just been destroyed, or not quite destroyed, the intelligence is unclear. And there's a child who apparently had something to do with it. A child who," Winston looked at the sleeping face against John's shoulder, "has a wound on his forehead that matches no weapon in any catalog I've ever consulted." John said nothing. "There will be people looking for him," Winston continued. "Wizards. They have their own structures, their own hierarchies, their own rules. A man named Dumbledore, apparently, who is something in their world like what I am in ours, but rather more theatrical about it. And they won't find him," Winston said, with the tone of a man announcing something he'd already decided rather than proposing something he was still considering. "Not unless we want them to." John looked at him. "The Continental's residential floor," Winston continued, with the smooth inevitability of a plan that had already been running for an hour before the conversation started, "has never appeared on any record produced by any government, intelligence agency, or, as of tonight, any wizarding registry. The protections on this building are considerable. More considerable than most people know." He paused. "If the boy is here, he is, effectively, nowhere." "You've already decided," John said. "I decided when you called." A small, precise smile. "The high table will need to be informed, of course. A wizard, a genuine one, raised inside our world is an unprecedented asset. The conversation will require careful management." "He's not an asset." Winston looked at him with the patience of a man who understood the statement perfectly and was choosing, for now, to accept it at face value. "Of course not," he said. "He's a child. Sharon," he raised his voice slightly, not looking away from John. Sharon materialized from the concierge desk with the quiet efficiency that was his signature and his art. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a composure so absolute it seemed structural, like it was part of his skeleton. He looked at the child the way he looked at everything, with complete professional attention and zero personal reaction. "Suite 1402, Winston said. "And we'll need several things rather urgently. The list is on your desk." "Already sourced, sir," Sharon said. "The suite is prepared." John looked at Sharon. "You knew." "Mr. Scott called ahead," Sharon said, with the faintest inclination of his head that managed to convey both yes and naturally and is there anything else you need simultaneously. John shifted the boy's weight and looked at Winston. I want him in my suite. Your suite has no, I want him in my suite, John repeated, quieter, with a finality that had nothing to do with volume. Winston regarded him for a moment, and something moved behind his eyes that wasn't calculation. Something warmer, more private, that he tucked away as efficiently as he always tucked such things. Of course, he said. I'll have the items moved to your floor. He turned toward the lifts, then paused without turning back. He'll need a name. In our records. Something that doesn't flag. John looked down at the boy sleeping against his shoulder. The lightning bolt scar. The green eyes. The small hand that had found his lapel again in sleep, gripping the fabric with a certainty that had nothing to do with consciousness. Harry, John said. Harry Wick. Winston was quiet for a moment. Wick, he said. Yeah. Another pause, a different quality to this one, something that might in a lesser man have been called moved. Good night, Mr. Wick, Winston said, and walked away across the marble lobby, his footsteps precise and even as always. John carried Harry to the lifts. The lobby of the Continental hummed quietly around them, the soft music, the low light, the particular hush of a place that exists slightly outside the ordinary world's rules, in the space between what is and what the people inside have agreed it to be. The lift arrived. John stepped in. The doors closed. Harry shifted against his shoulder, made a small sound, and didn't wake. John looked at his own reflection in the lift's polished doors, a man in a dark coat with a child against his shoulder and blood on the back of his right hand from the contract, dried and flaking now, something he'd meant to deal with miles ago and had forgotten about. He was 41 years old. He had a confirmed kill count that he didn't keep track of because keeping track of it would require making it mean something, and he'd made a careful professional decision not to do that. He had a suite in the Continental New York that he treated as a base of operations and occasionally as a place to sleep. He had a dog, a beagle named Daisy who was currently being walked by the Continental service staff and who would have extremely strong feelings about a toddler in the suite. He had no plan. He looked at Harry's sleeping face, and somewhere underneath all the things he didn't let himself feel, something very quiet said, "You have a plan. You just haven't admitted it yet." The lift opened on the 14th floor. John walked down the corridor, past the discreet gold numbers on dark wood doors, and let himself into his suite. Karen's people had already been, there was a cot assembled near the bedroom window, properly made up, a small nightlight plugged into the wall casting a warm amber circle. There was a bag of what appeared to be necessary child-related provisions on the kitchen counter. On the coffee table, with the precision of a man who anticipated requirements well in advance, Sharon had left a single piece of Continental stationery. John picked it up. 3 lines, in Karen's careful handwriting, pediatrician on retainer, Dr. Chen, available 7 a.m. The staff are informed and discreet. The dog has been told. She is reserving judgment. John almost smiled. Almost. He carried Harry to the cot and put him down with the careful, slightly uncertain movements of someone performing a technical task for the first time, adjusting for the weight differential and the angle and the fact that small humans had a tendency to wake up loudly when transferred between warm and cold surfaces. But Harry just rolled onto his side, pulled the blanket up with his face still pressed to the pillow, and settled with a sigh that sounded like the exhalation of a person completing a very long and difficult journey. John stood over the cot for a moment. The cut on Harry's forehead had closed completely now. Just a scar, clean, precise, the shape of a lightning bolt drawn by a hand that had known exactly what it was writing. John pulled the other wand from his coat pocket. He'd taken it from the sitting room downstairs, almost on autopilot, some operational habit about removing items from crime scenes that his hands had executed before his brain had consciously authorized it. It was a different wand from whatever the man downstairs had been carrying. This one had been tucked behind a photograph on the mantelpiece, as if it had been set aside. As if it had been kept there, not as a tool but as something else. A memory. Something saved. It was holly. John didn't know why he knew that, he just did, the way you sometimes know the name of a material from the feel of it. Holly and something at the core, something that made the air around it feel charged in a way that had nothing to do with weather. He turned it in his fingers, watching it. Nothing happened. It was just a stick of wood to him, inert and silent. He set it on the nightstand beside the cot. Harry's eyes opened. Not gradually, not with the slow resurface of waking, they just opened, green and direct, and found John's face immediately, the way someone orients toward a sound they've been tracking in their sleep. John looked back at him. Harry looked at the wand on the nightstand. He looked at John. He reached out one small hand and touched the wand, and the nightlight across the room flared briefly brighter, warm gold flooding the room for one moment before settling back to amber. Then Harry pulled his hand back, tucked it under his chin, and closed his eyes again. John sat down in the chair beside the cot. He didn't sleep for a while. He sat in the amber light and listened to the sound of the city 17 floors below, and thought about nothing in particular, and now and then looked at the sleeping boy in the cot with the scar on his forehead and the wild black hair and the quality of stillness around him that felt less like rest and more like potential. Outside, the 1st of November arrived without ceremony. In England, the wizarding world was throwing a party. In London, a tabloid was putting out a special edition. In 100 homes across magical Britain, people were raising glasses to a name and a story they thought they understood. In the Continental New York, John Wick sat in a chair by a cot and learned what it was like to have something worth protecting. The night settled around them, quiet and certain and entirely unaware of what it had set in motion. Chapter 2, The Continental Education. The first time Harry's magic did something intentional, he was 4 years old and deeply annoyed about breakfast. The issue was the orange juice. Sharon had set it at the far end of the kitchen counter, not to be cruel, simply because that was where the Continental's kitchen staff put things when they were replenishing the sweet supplies, and Karen's people were nothing if not consistent about placement. Harry had climbed down from the bed, padded across the suite in the oversized Continental bathrobe that he wore like a royal decree, and discovered that the orange juice was exactly 8 inches further from the table's edge than his reach allowed. He stretched. He strained. He made the face he made when things weren't cooperating, which was a face John had privately categorized as incoming weather. The orange juice slid across the counter and stopped precisely at the table's edge. Harry grabbed it, poured it with the focused satisfaction of a problem solved, and drank. John, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a Continental intelligence brief, had watched the entire sequence over the top of his papers. He put the brief down. He picked up his coffee. He thought about it. "Harry," he said. Harry looked up. "Do that again." Harry looked at the empty glass. He looked at the orange juice carton. He looked at John with the expression he wore when adults asked him to repeat things they'd already seen, which was mild patience stretched over mild impatience. Then he moved the orange juice carton back to the far end of the counter with a small push of his hand, and then moved it back again without touching it. John watched it happen. The carton moved like something had gently but firmly decided where it should be. John said. Harry drank his juice. That afternoon, John called Winston. "It's consistent," he said, standing by the window while Harry played on the suite floor with a set of wooden blocks that he had been arranging into increasingly architectural configurations. "Not accidental. He does it when he wants to. He knows he's doing it." "How long has this been happening?" Winston asked. "Probably since Godric's Hollow. I'm only sure of the last 6 months. John watched Harry stack a 7th block onto a tower that should have fallen 3 blocks ago. "He's doing it with the blocks right now." A pause. "The architectural integrity of that tower should concern you more than it does." "The architectural integrity of that tower is the least concerning thing in this room." "Fair point." Winston was quiet for a moment, and John could hear the particular quality of his silence that meant he was adding things together. I've been in contact with a woman in Edinburgh. She has knowledge of the magical world, their history, their structures, their educational approach. She was, shall we say, estranged from that community some years ago and has been working in more conventional intelligence circles since. She owes me several favors. What kind of contact? The useful kind. She can assess what we're dealing with. She can tell us what his abilities are likely to become, and more importantly, what they might do if they're not given proper structure. A brief pause. Uncontrolled magical ability in a child who is also being trained in our methods is either an extraordinary combination or a catastrophic one. I prefer to know which before we find out by accident. John looked at Harry, who had abandoned the blocks and was now attempting to teach Daisy, now 3 years old, deeply opinionated, and the actual ruler of the suite, a new trick. Daisy was tolerating this with the resigned good humor of a dog who understood exactly what was happening and had decided the treats involved made it worth the indignity. "Send her Tuesday," John said. Her name was Marguerite Voss, and she arrived on Tuesday with a leather case, a grey coat, and the self-possessed calm of someone who had spent enough time in extraordinary circumstances that the ordinary ones had simply stopped registering. She had cropped silver hair and sharp blue eyes, and the way she looked at Harry when she came through the suite door was not the way most people looked at children, it was the way a professional looked at a situation they were being asked to evaluate. Harry looked back at her with equal assessment. They regarded each other for a moment across the suite. "You're not a doctor," Harry said. Marguerite blinked. "Set her case down." "No," she said. "You smell like old paper and something that burned." Harry tilted his head. "And you looked at my scar first." Marguerite glanced at John, who gave her nothing. She looked back at Harry. "You're very observant for 4 years old." "I'm 4.5, Harry said, which was technically true. He turned and went back to the blocks, and then, without looking up, "John says you're going to help understand my thing." "Your thing," Marguerite repeated. "The moving stuff." Harry moved 3 blocks simultaneously without touching them, arranging them into a configuration that completed the structure he'd been building. "And the other things. The light making and the time I fixed Daisy's paw when she heard it." He looked at Marguerite over his shoulder. "I didn't mean to do the paw one, but John said it still counted." Marguerite sat down cross-legged on the suite floor, which John noted, because most people in her professional position didn't, and opened her case. Inside was not medical equipment. Inside was a collection of objects that seemed unremarkable to John and that made Harry immediately, intently curious: a brass compass, a small mirror with a dark frame, 3 smooth stones, and a wand that was visibly older than anything else in the case. "May I?" Marguerite asked, holding up the wand. Harry looked at it with the same expression he'd worn the night John had found him, direct, evaluating, the expression of someone taking the measure of something. Then he nodded. What followed was 3 hours of quiet, methodical assessment that Marguerite conducted with the patience and precision of someone who genuinely loved the work. John watched from the kitchen doorway. He never left Harry's environment without eyes on, which was simply how he was wired, and what he saw was instructive not just in what Harry could do, but in how he did it. Harry's magic was not chaotic. It was not the random emotional outburst that Marguerite clearly expected. John could see her adjusting her framework in real time, her expressions recalibrating. Harry's magic was precise. When he moved the brass compass across the floor, it went exactly where he wanted it. When he made the small mirror show a different reflection, not his own, but the window behind him, as if the glass had simply decided to face the other direction, he held it steady until he let it go. He frowned when things didn't work. He tried again. He worked through it the way he worked through the block configurations, with patience and a refusal to accept imprecision. When it was over, Marguerite sat across from John at the kitchen table with Harry occupied by Daisy and a new configuration project in the sitting room, and she looked at John with an expression that had several layers to it. "His control is exceptional," she said, quietly. "For his age, honestly, it's unlike anything I've seen. Magical children this young are usually reactive. Emotional trigger, accidental output. He's not. He's intentional. He understands what he's doing even when he hasn't learned the formal structure for it. He's been watching how things work since he could focus, John said. Marguerite nodded slowly. He'll need instruction in formal magical theory and wand work, eventually. The wand will extend and refine what he can do, his raw ability is considerable. Without structure, even controlled ability develops blind spots. She paused, fingers around her tea. But that's the lesser concern, actually. What's the greater concern? She looked at him steadily. The wizarding world will want him back. What happened in Godric's Hollow, what he survived, it's the kind of thing that generates prophecies, legends, institutional claims. There's already a man named Dumbledore who has been reorganizing the wizarding world's entire post-war structure around the assumption that Harry Potter is living with relatives in Surrey. She tilted her head. He's been wrong for 4 years. And when he finds out, he'll come for the boy. Not violently, Dumbledore doesn't work that way. He'll come with arguments, and reasons, and the particular weight of being the most important person in a room. He'll make the case that Harry belongs in that world. She paused. Does he? John didn't answer immediately. He looked through the doorway at Harry, who had roped Daisy into the block project somehow, positioning the dog at one end of an arrangement with the focused authority of a project manager. Both, he said finally. Marguerite nodded like that was the right answer. Then he needs both educations. And he needs to be capable enough in both that neither world can claim him without his consent. She picked up her tea. I can teach him the magical theory. The wand work. The history of that world. I have contacts who can provide additional instruction as he grows. She met John's eyes. What happens to him in the meantime is your department. Yeah, John said. I know. The years had a shape to them. Harry learned to fight the way he learned everything, by watching first, then doing, then refining until the gap between what he intended and what happened was too small to matter. John started him at 5 with movement basics, the foundational grammar of how a body occupies space and controls it. Not fighting yet, just the physical vocabulary. Balance, weight, breath, how to stand so that falling is a decision and not an accident. At 6, John brought in a woman named May who had been a Continental operative in Hong Kong for 15 years before an injury had redirected her considerable skills toward instruction. She taught Harry judo foundations on a mat in one of the Continental sub-basement training rooms, which Harry attended 3 mornings a week with the focused enthusiasm he brought to everything interesting and the absolute absence of complaint he brought to everything difficult. At 7, something happened. It happened during a session with May, in the training room, when she threw Harry for the 7th time in a row and he was lying on the mat processing what had gone wrong, and the frustration built past some internal threshold and the lights in the training room went out, every one of them, all at once, the emergency strip lighting included, and in the sudden complete dark, Harry stood up, and when the lights came back on 3 seconds later, his form was different. Settled. Like the frustration had burned off and left something cleaner behind. May looked at him. Harry looked at the lights. Did you do that? May asked. I don't know, Harry said, which was honest. Maybe. Can we go again? They went again. He didn't get thrown the next time. Or the time after that. John wasn't in the room for that session, but May told him that evening over the Continental's bar, and he sat with his drink and thought about it with the private feeling he'd developed for moments like this, something that was pride but that he didn't call that, because calling it that would mean admitting how deep it went. The magical education ran parallel. Marguerite came twice a week, then 3 times, then, when Harry turned 7 and the rate at which he consumed material made twice-weekly sessions seem like watering a plant with a teaspoon, daily for 2 hours after the morning training. She taught him theory first, the fundamental nature of magic, how it worked, the difference between intent and execution, why wand movements mattered and what they were actually doing to the underlying structure of what wizards called reality. Harry absorbed theory like he absorbed everything, quickly, quietly, and then asked questions that made Marguerite visibly recalibrate her lesson plan. The wand work started at 7.5, with a practice wand Marguerite acquired through channels she didn't specify. Harry's first session lasted 40 minutes, and by the end of it he had produced a steady beam of light and moved 3 objects with conscious direction. Marguerite had gone home that evening and called Winston. "He's extraordinarily gifted," she said. "So we're told," Winston said. "No, I mean," she paused, and Winston, who had been dismissing hyperbole for 50 years, heard something in the pause that made him pay closer attention. "His connection to magic is structural. It's not like other children learning wand work, where they're trying to reach something outside themselves. For him he's not reaching. It's already there. The wand just gives it a direction." Winston considered this for a moment. "Can it be weaponized?" A long pause. "Winston. I'm asking as a question of operational capacity, not intent." "Everything can be weaponized," Marguerite said, with a flatness that meant she knew exactly what she was dealing with and had decided to be direct about it. "That is not the question I would be asking about an 8-year-old. "What question would you be asking?" "What he's going to want," she said. "Because whatever he wants, he's going to be able to do. That's usually the more important variable." At 8, Harry started picking locks. Not because anyone taught him to, because he found a set of lock picks in the Continental's maintenance workshop and spent 2 weeks teaching himself with the methodical patience that was becoming his most consistent trait. John found out when Harry opened the supply cabinet in the training room that had been stuck for 3 months, handed John the contents list, and went back to his book. John got the lock picks. He took them to the kitchen table. He sat down. He looked at Harry, who was reading on the sofa with Daisy beside him, fully aware of John's attention and choosing to let the silence develop. "Where did you find these?" John asked. "Workshop on B3. The maintenance guy, Dimitri, he has a whole collection. He was going to throw these out." Harry turned a page. "I asked if I could have them. He said yes." "Did you ask before or after you'd already used them?" Harry considered this. "Technically simultaneously." John put the lock picks down. He looked at his kid, 8 years old, sharp and contained, with the habit of silence that he'd absorbed from his environment like a plant absorbing the quality of its soil, and felt the thing that wasn't called pride doing its thing again. "Come here," he said. Harry put the book down, came to the table, and sat across from John. He looked at the lock picks without reaching for them. "I'm not in trouble," Harry said. It wasn't a question. "No." John picked up the simplest pick. "These are wrong for what you were doing. For a stuck cabinet tumbler you want," he sorted through the set, pulled out a different one, "this one. The tension wrench goes here first." Harry's face did the thing where the attention sharpened. He leaned forward. They spent 2 hours at the kitchen table. By the end, Harry could open the suite's door lock in under 30 seconds. By the following week, under 12. Winston, who was informed of this development with the even-handed reporting of a man who had learned to treat his own paternal feelings as operational data, allocated the Continental's head of security for monthly sessions on advanced lock and bypass technique. This was how Harry's education worked. Something emerged, someone capable appeared to develop it, and the structure grew around him like a building that knew its own blueprints. Languages came easily. He absorbed French and Russian from the Continental staff before anyone formally taught them, picking up vocabulary through context and deployment with the same structural approach he brought to everything. By 9, he had functional Russian, serviceable French, and a working understanding of Latin that Marguerite had introduced for its magical utility and that Harry had apparently decided to simply learn properly rather than treat as a lookup table. The rules came at 9. John sat him down one evening, not in the training room, not at the kitchen table, in the sitting room with the city lights behind the window and Daisy on the floor between them, which was John's version of setting. He put 2 glasses on the coffee table, water in both, which was John's version of indicating this was serious. Harry sat across from him and waited. You know what this place is, John said. The Continental. Harry's hands were in his lap, relaxed. Neutral ground. No business on the premises. The rules of hospitality apply to everyone inside regardless of affiliation. Do you know why those rules exist? Harry thought about it genuinely rather than immediately, which was one of his habits that John respected. Because without them, someone would have burned the whole thing down a long time ago. The rules are the only thing that makes it safe to be in the same room as someone who wants to kill you. He paused. And safe to be in the same room as someone who's killed everyone you love. Which is harder? John looked at him. Sharon told me, Harry said, with the quiet honesty that was his default. Not specifics. Just the shape of it. John picked up his water glass. Put it down. The rules aren't just for here, he said. There are rules everywhere. Different rules. The high table's rules cover every Continental, every affiliate, every operation run under that umbrella. Breaking them has costs. Some costs are professional. Some are permanent. Harry nodded. You're going to grow up in both worlds, John said. And in the other one, the magical one, there are also rules. Different rules, different penalties, different politics. Some of their rules are stupid. Some of ours are too. He met Harry's eyes. The ones that aren't stupid are the ones about keeping people who shouldn't die from dying. Everything else is negotiable. Harry was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city moved in its usual way, indifferent and continuous. The man who destroyed my parents' house, Harry said. His voice was even. I know who he was. Marguerite explained. Yeah. He had rules too. His own. About who was worth protecting. Yes. And he was wrong about it. He was wrong about everything, John said. Including the part where he thought he could win. Harry looked at him with those green eyes that had been, since Godric's Hollow, the most direct thing in any room they occupied. You think he's not completely gone? It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't fearful. It was the assessment of someone who had been paying attention to every piece of information in his environment for 9 years and had arrived at a conclusion he was checking against a source. John didn't insult him by hedging. No. I don't. Harry nodded. Okay, he said, and there was nothing dramatic in it, no declaration, no visible stealing. Just the sound of someone updating their operational picture and moving on. John thought that might have been the moment he was sure. Not that Harry was going to be fine, John had been sure of that since the Continental lobby, at 2 a.m, with a sleeping toddler against his shoulder. But sure of what kind of fine? The kind that doesn't need protecting because it has already decided, quietly and without performance, that it is not the kind of thing that gets broken. The letter arrived 3 weeks after Harry's 11th birthday. It arrived in the way that letters arrived at the Continental, screened, assessed, and brought to the relevant party by Sharon on a small silver tray, with the professional neutrality of a man who had delivered correspondence ranging from death threats to birthday cards and applied the same care to both. Harry was in the middle of a weapons familiarization session when Sharon knocked, so it was John who opened the envelope first. The parchment was heavy, cream-colored, sealed with wax. The wax had an owl on it. The address on the front said Harry Wick, Suite 1401, the Continental, New York, in green ink that had adjusted itself to the right address with an efficiency that suggested the letter knew where it was going better than the postal service did. John read it. He read it again. He carried it to Winston's office, where Winston was reviewing European Continental reports with a cup of Earl Grey and the focused efficiency of someone who didn't waste a minute of working hours. John put the letter on Winston's desk. Winston read it with the unhurried attention he gave everything. Then he set it down, pressed his fingertips together, and looked at John across the desk with the expression of a man who has been waiting for a particular piece to appear on the board and is now adjusting his strategy accordingly. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Winston said. Yeah. September the 1st. Winston picked up his tea. That's 8 weeks. I know. He should go, Winston said, without hesitation. John looked at him. He needs that education, Winston continued, evenly. Marguerite has taken him as far as informal instruction can. He needs the formal structure, the environment, the peers, both for the magical development and for the intelligence value of being embedded in that world. He set down the tea. He's been prepared for operational environments since he was 5. A school is, by comparison, low stakes. It's not low stakes, John said. No, Winston agreed, and his voice shifted slightly, losing the operational register, becoming something more direct. Because Dumbledore is there. And Dumbledore has spent 10 years looking for Harry Potter, and when he finds what we've sent him instead of the boy he expected, he will begin making plans. So we prepare Harry for Dumbledore. We've been preparing Harry for Dumbledore since Marguerite first mentioned his name. Winston picked up the letter again. The question is not whether Harry can handle it. The question is whether Harry knows what he's walking into. He knows. Tell him anyway, Winston said. All of it. What Dumbledore is. What the prophecy says. Yes, I have a copy, my contacts in the British wizarding world are thorough. What the man will expect from Harry and what he'll try to make Harry be. Winston's eyes were level and certain. Give him every piece of the picture. Then let him decide. John picked up the letter. He'll go, he said. Yes, Winston said, with the quiet confidence of someone who knew Harry Wick well enough to be certain of this. He will. That evening, John found Harry on the training room mats, working through a kata May had taught him 2 years ago and had since been refining on his own into something more personal, the same foundation, different angles, like a language developing its own accent. He moved through it with his eyes open and his attention fully occupied, and he was also doing something with his magic simultaneously, a low, steady pressure that moved with the form, like a second layer to every motion, the way a bow and the music it's playing occupy the same physical space. John watched from the doorway for a moment. Then he came in and sat on the bench and put the letter on the mat beside the weapons rack. Harry finished the kata. He wasn't breathing hard, he'd learned early not to, learned to move at the edge of exertion rather than past it, a conservation principle that John had instilled and that had become instinctive. He looked at the letter. Then he picked it up and read it. He read it twice, which was his standard, first pass for information, second pass for what was in the margins. Then he set it down and looked at John. Hogwarts, he said. Yeah. Harry looked at the letter for another moment. Then, Dumbledore teaches there. He runs it. There's a difference. Is there? In our world there is, John said. In his, maybe less so. He leaned forward, forearms on his knees. He's been looking for you for 10 years. He thinks you're living with your mother's sister in Surrey. He's built his entire post-war plan around the assumption that you'll come to Hogwarts at 11 years old without knowing what you are, without knowing what happened, and without any context for who he is. Harry's eyes were steady. And instead he gets me. Instead he gets you. A small silence. Daisy, who had followed John down, came and pressed her head against Harry's knee, and Harry put his hand on her without looking down, a gesture of such automatic affection that it was its own kind of thing. What does he want me to do? Harry asked. He wants the prophecy. Eventually. John said. There's a Dark Lord who isn't completely gone. Dumbledore's plan requires a weapon. He's decided you're it. He held Harry's gaze. That's not what you are. But he'll make the argument. Harry considered it. He might be right, he said. Not about the weapon part. But about, there's something between me and that man. The scar. He touched it, briefly, and his expression was not afraid. It was analytical. I felt it. When Marguerite's been teaching me the dark arts history, some of it resonates, in a way that other things don't. I think the connection is real. I think so too. So I might have to deal with him eventually. With Voldemort. He said the name the way he said every name, without particular drama, without flinching. Maybe, John said. But on your terms, in your time, for reasons you decide on. He paused. Not because an old man built a plan that requires a sacrifice play. Harry looked at him for a long moment. You'll be there, Harry said. Not asking. I'll be wherever I need to be, John said. Harry picked up the letter. He turned it over in his hands, feeling the parchment, looking at the green ink that had found him across an ocean and a decade of careful invisibility. I'm going to need a wand, he said. A real one. Winston's already working on it. Harry almost smiled. It was the smile he saved for moments when the world confirmed what he'd already expected, the smile of someone whose map of reality tends to be accurate. Of course he is. He stood, pocketed the letter, and rolled up the training mat. John, he said, without turning around. Yeah. Thank you. A pause, the kind that holds more than it says. For Godric's Hollow. I know I've never, I just wanted to say it properly. John sat with it for a moment. The training room hummed with its quiet, recirculated air. The fluorescent lights did their steady, unsentimental work. Go take a shower, John said. You've got theory with Marguerite at 7. Harry picked up his water bottle and walked out, and John stayed on the bench in the empty training room and did not call it what it was, and felt it anyway. Chapter 3, First Year, First Blood. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 o'clock on the 1st of September, and Harry Wick was on it 17 minutes early. Not because he was eager. Because arriving early to an unfamiliar operational environment gave you time to walk the length of it twice, identify the exits, assess the other occupants, and choose your position before the crowd made positioning a matter of luck rather than choice. He'd picked a compartment near the rear, good sightlines toward the corridor, window on the left for external observation, door he could lock from the inside if required. He put his trunk on the rack, sat facing the door, and watched the platform fill through the window with the patient attention of someone who found crowds informative rather than overwhelming. The wand was in his inside jacket pocket. Ollivander's had been an experience. The old man had looked at Harry across the narrow shop with eyes that were both very sharp and very far away, and he'd said, before Harry could speak, Mr. Potter. I wondered when you'd come. Wick, Harry said. Ollivander had blinked. Looked at him differently. Then he'd said, quietly, of course. But the wand will know, won't it? It always knows. What followed was 40 minutes of Ollivander pulling boxes from the shelves with the air of someone conducting a conversation with the room rather than with Harry, offering wands that were good and wands that were interesting and wands that hummed and wands that sparked, and Harry trying each one with the focused patience of a student in an unfamiliar discipline, feeling the difference between this and the practice wand Marguerite had provided, feeling the way each one either connected or didn't. The one that connected was the last one Ollivander brought out. He'd paused before handing it over, a real pause, waited, the kind that meant the old man was deciding something. Holly, Ollivander said. 11 inches. Phoenix feather core. Pliable but strong. He held it out. Curious thing. The phoenix that gave this feather gave only one other. The wand that wand belongs to, it did something to you once. Harry took the wand. The effect was immediate and private, a warmth that ran from the grip to his elbow and then settled, like something that had been looking for its position finally finding it. Not dramatic. Just correct. Like the door of a safe clicking into alignment. Yes, Harry said. Ollivander looked at him for a long moment. You're not what I expected, he said. No, Harry agreed, and put the wand in his pocket and paid the 7 galleons and left. Now, on the train, he turned the wand in his fingers once, feeling the easy familiarity of 2 days' constant handling, and put it away. The compartment door opened. A girl came in, bushy brown hair, bright eyes already conducting a rapid survey of the space. She was carrying a book and a cat carrier and moving with the efficient purpose of someone who had a destination in mind and had located it. She looked at Harry. She looked at the trunk on the rack. She looked at the seat across from him. "Is this taken?" she asked. "No," Harry said. She put the cat carrier on the rack, sat down with the book open before she was fully in the seat, and then stopped. She looked up at him over the top of the book with the expression of someone who has just noticed something and is deciding whether to mention it. "You're Harry Potter," she said. "Harry Wick," he said, the same way he'd said it to Ollivander. Even. Not defensive, not aggressive. Just factual. "Your scar is a scar." He met her eyes without any heat. "You're Hermione Granger." She blinked. "How do you know that?" "You're in Hogwarts, a history twice. There's an index entry for the highest recorded entrance examination scores. Your name's at the top of it. Marginal pencil note on the entry in my copy says Granger, H, watch." He looked at her steadily. "Whoever made that note has accurate taste." Hermione closed the book. She looked at him with the expression of someone recalibrating from surprise to fascination, which happened in real time and was visible. "Someone annotated their copy of Hogwarts, a history about me. About several people. It's a working document." "Whose is it?" "Mine now," Harry said. She looked at him for another moment. Then, with the decision of someone who had assessed the situation and found it interesting rather than concerning, "I'm Hermione Granger." "Harry Wick." "Not Potter." "Wick," he said, for the third time, and there was something in the steadiness of it, not defensive, just certain, that made her put the question away rather than push it. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, Hermione reading and Harry watching the platform finish filling and the train begin its preparations for departure. When the engine pulled forward and England started sliding past the windows in its September green, Hermione looked up from her book again. "Have you read all the textbooks?" she asked. "And some they're not assigning." "Which ones?" Harry listed 6 titles. Hermione made a small sound that was either agreement or competitive recalibration, and then she listed 4 titles he hadn't mentioned, which he hadn't read, and he made a note of them. "We should be friends," Hermione said, with the practical directness of someone who had identified a mutually beneficial arrangement. "Yes," Harry said. "We should." The train moved through morning England and the cat in the carrier made its opinions about the journey known, and Harry watched the other students pass in the corridor, watching body language, noting names where he caught them, building the map of the environment with the patient thoroughness that was as automatic as breathing. A red-haired boy appeared in the doorway with food stains on his robes and a friendly, slightly overwhelmed energy. He looked at the compartment. He looked at Harry. His eyes went immediately to the scar. "Sorry, everywhere else is full." "Can I sit down?" Harry said. "Cheers." He dropped into the seat beside Hermione with the comfortable lack of ceremony of someone who defaulted to friendliness as a first position. Ron Weasley. Harry Wick. Hermione Granger. Ron processed the name against what was clearly an expected name and visibly decided not to push it. He was, Harry noted, shrewd under the affability, the eyes were quicker than the manner suggested. "Your first years?" "Thought so." "What house do you think you'll be in?" "Gryffindor," Hermione said, with the confidence of someone who had researched the question thoroughly. Ron looked at Harry. "Whichever one works," Harry said. Ron blinked. Most people have a strong preference. Most people are choosing based on identity instead of utility," Harry said, not unkindly. "I'll know which one works when I see the environment." Ron stared at him for a moment. Then he said, with the tone of someone arriving at an unexpected conclusion, "You're going to be really interesting to know, aren't you?" "Probably," Harry agreed. Hogwarts, seen across the lake in the blue October dark from a fleet of small boats, was the kind of thing that hit you in the chest before your brain finished processing it. The castle rose from the mountain like it had grown there rather than been built, towers and battlements and lit windows stacked against the night sky, and the lake was still and black and enormous around them, and the first years were very quiet in their boats. Harry looked at it with careful attention and noted, multiple towers, sightline advantages from the north-facing parapets, at least 4 entry points visible from this approach, 1 underground, the boat passage they were currently using. He noted the age of the stonework, which varied in ways that suggested significant additions over centuries. He noted the lights moving in the highest tower, which moved with the irregular pattern of someone carrying a lamp rather than the mechanical rhythm of a mechanism. Then he looked at the castle properly, not as an environment to map, but as the thing it was, and even he, who had been trained since childhood to separate assessment from reaction, felt something move through him that wasn't tactical. It felt, obscurely and without explanation, like a place that knew him. He put that away. He'd examine it later. The boats docked. A towering man with a beard like a storm system led them up to the castle doors. Hagrid, Harry noted, adding him to the map, filing genuinely warm, potentially sentimental about Harry Potter specifically, watch for information leakage. The doors opened onto the entrance hall and the noise and light hit them in a wave, and then a professor was leading them to a side chamber to wait, and the sorting was explained, and Harry watched the other children process nervousness and excitement and found himself, as he often did in group situations, slightly outside the emotional weather of the room, not uncaring, just differently calibrated. How do you think they sort? Ron muttered. Assessment tool, Harry said. The hat in the song, it reads intent and character and maps it to the 4 houses. Ron stared at him. How do you know that already? Marguerite's notes on the Hogwarts founding were thorough. Whose? The doors opened and they went in. The Great Hall was a different kind of impressive than the castle exterior, the ceiling showing the night sky, the candles floating, the 4 long tables and the watching faces, the weight of a place where a great deal of important things had happened and knew it. Harry walked in the line of first years and looked at the high table, professors, assessing the incoming class with varying degrees of attention, and found the man he was looking for immediately. Dumbledore. Tall, long white beard, half-moon glasses, an expression of genuine, warm benevolence that was absolutely authentic and absolutely constructed simultaneously, not a contradiction, but a sophistication. The warmth was real. The architecture of it was also a choice. It was, Harry thought, a very impressive face to have, and the man behind it was visibly, quietly, perpetually thinking. Dumbledore's eyes moved along the line of first years with the skilled sweep of someone who had done this for decades and could read a room full of 11-year-olds like other people read a newspaper. Harry watched his gaze travel the line and felt, precisely, the moment it arrived at him. Dumbledore stopped. Not visibly, he didn't move, didn't react, the expression didn't change. But something in the quality of his attention shifted in a way that Harry recognized because John had taught him to recognize it, the shift between ambient awareness and focus. Dumbledore had found something he hadn't expected to find and was in the process of very calmly deciding what to do about it. Harry met his eyes across the hall, and held them for 2 seconds, not challenging, not deferential, just present, and then looked away. The sorting went alphabetically. Hermione went to Gryffindor with the satisfied expression of a correct prediction confirmed. Ron followed her. Harry stood in the diminishing line and watched the hat with genuine curiosity, because the hat was the most interesting thing in the room, an object with enough accumulated consciousness to conduct a real assessment. That was not nothing. Wick, Harry. He sat on the stool. Professor McGonagall put the hat on his head. It was, immediately, not like putting on a hat. Well, said a voice inside his head, with the tone of someone who had been doing this for 1,000 years and had just encountered something that required them to update their notes. This is different. Hello, Harry thought back, with the same courtesy he'd extend to any assessor. 11 years old, the hat said, and the voice was doing several things simultaneously, moving through Harry's mind with the focused efficiency of a highly competent intelligence operation. And you've been, yes. Yes, that is unusual. That is very unusual. Multiple disciplines, multiple languages, magical training outside any framework I've seen come through this hall. A pause. And this. The hat seemed to settle somewhere, touching something deeper. You're not afraid of much, are you? No, Harry agreed. Not of me, certainly. Most children either try to impress me or try to hide from me. You're doing neither. You're an assessment tool, Harry thought. Hiding from you would be counterproductive. Impressing you would be performative. Neither is useful. The hat made a sound that might have been laughter. Slytherin would appreciate the logic. Ravenclaw would appreciate the mind. Hufflepuff, a pause, would appreciate something you don't show very often. Gryffindor, I know where I'm going, Harry said. The hat was quiet for a moment. Do you? The environment requires it. Most of the important things will happen in and around Gryffindor. The headmaster's plan involves that specific structure. Being in a different house makes me peripheral to the main event. He paused. Also, it's where my friends are going. Friends, the hat said. You've known them for 8 hours. I know enough. You're absolutely certain. Yes. The hat made its decision with the quality of someone who has genuinely enjoyed a conversation and is sad to end it. Then, aloud, in the hall, loud enough for the entire room, Gryffindor. Harry took the hat off, handed it back to McGonagall with a nod, and walked to the Gryffindor table where Hermione was already clapping and Ron was making space on the bench. He sat down, and did not look at the high table, and felt Dumbledore's eyes on his back like a hand not quite touching his shoulder. The castle learned him the way places learn people who pay attention to them, gradually, through the accumulation of evidence. Harry knew the 7th floor's moving staircases in the first week and the dungeon's alternative drainage routes by the end of the second. He'd found 2 concealed passages by Halloween that weren't in the Hogwarts infrastructure notes Marguerite had sourced, which meant either her information was incomplete or someone had added the passages after the most recent survey. He filed the discrepancy. He'd revisit it. Classes were interesting in the way that things are interesting when you're encountering formal structure for knowledge you've built informally. Transfiguration felt like meeting the grammar of a language he'd been speaking by ear. Charms was refinement, he could already do most of what they were covering, just not always with one-directed precision. Potions was new enough to be genuinely engaging, the chemistry of magical materials following rules that rewarded precision and punished assumption, which suited him fine. Defense against the dark arts, taught by a man named Quirrell who had a stutter and a turban and a nervousness that was slightly too consistent to be authentic, he sat through with careful attention and the private note that there was something wrong about the back of Quirrell's head. He didn't know what yet. He noted it and moved on. Hermione was the best student in every class, and she knew it, and she was in the process of learning how to know it without performing it, a process Harry watched with genuine interest because she was simultaneously very right about most things and occasionally very wrong about how being right worked in practice. He said this to her directly, one evening in the Gryffindor common room, which did not go well in the short term and went very well in the long term, which was usually how directness worked. You just told me I'm annoying, Hermione said. I told you that being right and being heard aren't the same skill, Harry said. You're excellent at the first one. The second one takes practice. That's not, she stopped. Her eyes moved in the way they moved when she was processing something she didn't want to agree with. That's not entirely wrong, she said, with the particular stiffness of someone making a concession on principle. No, he said. She looked at him. You're very strange, Harry Wick. Yes, he agreed. I mean that positively. I know. Ron, who had been watching this exchange with the expression of someone watching a sport they hadn't expected to enjoy, said, Can we go to dinner now? The troll happened on Halloween. It happened the way most crises happened at Hogwarts. Harry was beginning to understand, loudly, publicly, with the maximum possible collateral confusion. Professor Quirrell ran into the Great Hall during the feast, announced a mountain troll in the dungeons with the dramatic delivery of someone who had been practicing the announcement, and fainted, and the hall erupted. In the subsequent evacuation, Hermione was not in the crowd because Hermione had been in the girls' bathroom on the third floor crying about something Ron had said at lunch, which Harry had registered and filed and had been intending to address after dinner. He told Ron where she was. Ron started toward the stairs. Harry was already moving. Third floor, east corridor, second door on the left. The troll was already in the bathroom. They could hear it from 20 feet down the corridor, the particular sound of something large and not very bright destroying everything it touched with the cheerful indiscrimination of something that didn't know the difference between obstacles and furniture. Ron stopped at the door. Harry didn't. He went through the bathroom door the way John had taught him to enter uncertain rooms, sideways, low, reading the space before committing to a position. The troll was 12 feet tall, gray-green, smelled like something had decided to be a cave and then given up halfway through, and it was currently engaged in destroying a sink with its club because the sink had offended it by existing. Hermione was backed into the corner between two toilet stalls, not screaming, which Harry noted as a point in her favor. She was scared but she hadn't panicked, which were different things. Harry took the room in one look. The troll hadn't seen him yet. It was 3 steps from Hermione. The ceiling was 12 feet, which meant the troll had about 8 inches of vertical clearance, which was relevant because a creature that size had no mobility advantage in a low ceiling space. He drew his wand. Wingardium Leviosa, he said, not performing the incantation, just using it, clean and certain, putting the full weight of his intent behind the wand movement. The troll's club went straight up, out of its hand, hit the ceiling, and stopped there. The troll stared at its empty hand with the profound confusion of something that had never had its logic interrupted before. Then Harry pushed, not a spell, just his magic, raw and direct, a shove against the troll's knees from the left side, and the troll went sideways into the stalls, which collapsed under its weight. He was already moving when the troll went down, pulling Hermione by the arm out of the corner, putting himself and 2 meters of floor between her and the troll before it started getting back up. The troll got halfway to its feet. Harry hit it with a stupefy that knocked it flat on its back. The bathroom was quiet. Hermione, beside him, was looking at the troll. Then at Harry. Then at the troll again. She had the expression of someone downloading an experience that was going to take considerable time to fully process. 38 seconds, Ron said from the doorway. Harry put his wand away. 41. I miscounted the steps. You counted. Ron came in, picking his way through the rubble of the toilet stalls, staring at the troll with wide eyes. Harry. We need to go, Harry said. The professors will be here in under 2 minutes and the explanation for being in here when we were supposed to be evacuating is going to be more complicated if we're still here when they arrive. He looked at Hermione. Can you walk? Yes, Hermione said, with the compressed precision of someone pulling themselves together with both hands. Yes. Then come on. They were in the corridor and moving toward the staircase when McGonagall appeared at the end of it with 2 other professors behind her, and the explanation that followed was both more complicated and more successful than Harry had calculated, largely because Hermione, who had independently decided that she owed Harry something significant and was paying it immediately, told the story with such calm authority and logical structure that McGonagall's outrage was replaced, visibly and reluctantly, with a reluctant respect. 50 points to Gryffindor. Harry took it. Points were currency and currency was useful. That night, in the common room, after Ron had told the story twice to an increasingly invested audience and Hermione had sat in the corner with her book in the particular stillness of someone recalibrating their entire framework for a situation, she came and sat across from Harry. She looked at him for a moment. You went in before you knew you could win, she said. I went in after I assessed that I could win, he said. Those are different things. You assessed in the doorway. That was about 2 seconds. Yes. She was quiet, processing. What would you have done if you couldn't win? Made it harder to lose, Harry said. Bought time. Created an exit. Improvised. He looked at her. But I could win. So. Hermione looked at him with the expression she was developing specifically for Harry, a kind of fascinated, slightly frustrated attention, like someone reading a text in a language they mostly knew but that kept introducing new vocabulary. Where did you learn to do that? Do what? All of it, she said. The spell work, your Wingardium Leviosa was more controlled than Professor Flitwick's demonstration, and he's been teaching it for 40 years. The combat awareness. The way you moved. She paused. You've been trained. Yes, he said. She waited. Not here, he said. Not by anyone at this school. She looked at him for a long moment. She was deciding something, he could see it, the specific quality of her thinking face that meant she was at a fork and was choosing the path. Then she said, okay. Not I'll find out anyway, not but I have follow-up questions. Just okay. Which was its own kind of answer about who Hermione Granger was. Thank you, Harry said. For earlier. With McGonagall. You went into a bathroom with a mountain troll for me, Hermione said. I think that covers any debt. You covered me because you thought it was the right thing, Harry said. Not because of the troll. She looked at him. Yes, she said. That's worth more. She almost smiled. Then she picked up her book and went back to her corner, and something between them had settled into place that wouldn't move. Dumbledore called Harry to his office on the second Thursday of November. The letter, delivered not through the post but by a phoenix, which arrived at breakfast and deposited an envelope on Harry's plate and was gone before most of the table had finished being impressed by it, was in Dumbledore's handwriting, which was ornate in a way that was somehow completely genuine. It asked, with the careful courtesy of someone who understood that asking was different from summoning, whether Harry might like to come for tea at 7 o'clock. Harry told Ron and Hermione. Ron said, the headmaster wants to have tea with you on your second month. That's not normal. No, Harry agreed. What are you going to tell him? Hermione asked. As much as I decide to, Harry said. Hermione looked like she had thoughts about this. She kept them, for now. The office was everything the aesthetic vocabulary of the man suggested it would be, circular, warm, accumulated, full of quietly operating instruments whose purposes varied from functional to symbolic. Portraits of previous headmasters and headmistresses lined the walls, some awake, some sleeping, all with the quality of awareness that meant they were paying more attention than they appeared to. Fawkes the Phoenix was on his perch in the corner, regarding Harry with the attentive warmth of a creature that recognized something about him. Dumbledore was behind the desk, rising to greet Harry with the genuine pleasure of someone who had been looking forward to something for a very long time. Harry, he said. Please, sit down. I have tea. Thank you, Professor, Harry said, and sat, and looked at the man across the desk with clear, direct eyes, and did nothing to suggest he was either intimidated or performing the opposite of that. Dumbledore poured tea with the unhurried practice of someone for whom the ritual mattered. He asked about classes. Harry answered, because the information was neither dangerous nor revealing, with genuine engagement about transfiguration and a measured observation about potions that made Dumbledore's eyes brighten. Then Dumbledore set down his cup, and the warmth in his expression didn't diminish, but the quality of his attention sharpened in a way that Harry had been expecting since the sorting. I want to ask you something directly, Dumbledore said. I hope you'll forgive the directness, I find it tends to be more respectful of both parties than circling. He met Harry's eyes. Where have you been? Harry looked at him. For 10 years, Dumbledore said, gently. We believed you were with your family in Surrey. When I went to check on you, 3 weeks before term, you weren't there. You'd never been there. The protections I put on that house, he paused, there was no one to protect. He held Harry's gaze with a combination of concern and something more contained. I've been wondering about you for a very long time. I know, Harry said. A small silence. Dumbledore's expression didn't change. You know. I know you put me in Godric's hollow. I know what you intended. I know the plan. He said it without accusation. He held his tea with both hands and met Dumbledore's eyes steadily. I also know why you made the choices you did. I've read the relevant history, the prophecy, the political situation in the wizarding world after Voldemort's first fall. He used the name the way he always used it, and watched Dumbledore's reaction, a slight blink, a reorganization, something recalibrating. You were working with limited information under significant time pressure. Most of your choices were reasonable given what you knew. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Whatever he'd expected, it wasn't this, not the articulate, unhurried precision of an 11-year-old who just summarized and evaluated his decade-long strategic plan with the tone of a peer reviewing someone's work. And where were you? Dumbledore asked, quietly. Safe, Harry said. Educated. Cared for. By whom? Harry held his gaze. People who didn't leave me in a ruined house to be found by accident, he said, and it wasn't heated, it was factual, and somehow that was sharper. Dumbledore absorbed it. He was, Harry noted, very good, there was no defensive reaction, no ego in evidence. He took the weight of the statement, acknowledged it internally, moved on. You're angry with me. No, Harry said, and meant it. You made a decision about someone else's life with the information you had. I understand that. I might have made the same decision. He set down the tea. But I'm not the person you built the plan around. I'm not going to be. And what person are you? Dumbledore asked. My own, Harry said. The portraits on the walls were all awake now, Harry noted. All paying close attention. Fawkes had turned on his perch to face them properly. Dumbledore looked at Harry across the desk with eyes that were many things simultaneously, the warmth genuine, the calculation real, the concern authentic, the assessment ongoing, and he said, I believe you. And I want you to know, whatever I planned, whatever I believed about what your role might be, I am, first of all, glad you're alive and well. He paused. That's not a strategic statement. I know, Harry said. I can tell the difference. Dumbledore regarded him for a moment longer. Then, quietly, with the quality of someone setting something down, I expect we'll have more conversations. Yes, Harry said. I hope you'll be honest with me. I'll be direct, Harry said. That's not always the same thing. Dumbledore almost smiled. No, he said. It's not. But it's a better starting point than most. Harry picked up his tea. They finished it in a silence that was not comfortable, exactly, but was at least honest, two people on opposite sides of a chessboard who had acknowledged the board and each other, and were now deciding what to do about that. When Harry left, Dumbledore sat in his office for a long time, and the portraits talked among themselves in low voices, and Fawkes sang a single low note that hung in the warm air and then faded. The mirror appeared in December, in the way things appeared at Hogwarts, suddenly, without explanation, in a room that had been empty the day before. Harry found it because Harry found most things at Hogwarts through a combination of systematic exploration and the castle's apparent decision to show him things, which he still didn't fully understand but was prepared to work with. The room was empty except for the mirror, tall, ornate, gold frame, the inscription across the top in letters that were clearly not random, Eris stra eru oit ube kafru oit anwosi. He looked at the inscription. Reversed it. I show not your face but your heart's desire. He looked at the mirror. In the glass, a woman with red hair and green eyes looked back at him with an expression of such overwhelming love that it hit him like a physical thing. He felt it in his chest, sudden and sharp, before his analytical mind caught up and named it. Beside her, a man with dark hair and glasses, with his eyes and his chin and his particular way of standing that Harry only recognized because it matched the posture of the man downstairs at Godric's Hollow, the man who had stood between his parents. Harry stood in front of the mirror for a long time. He was not someone who cried easily or often, it wasn't repression, it was just that his emotional processing ran deep and quiet rather than surface and visible. But he stood in the empty room and looked at the faces of the people who had chosen him first, before the scar and the prophecy and everything else, and something in him acknowledged the shape of that loss with a directness that matched everything else about him. Then he took out his wand and cast Muffliato because he'd read about it in an advanced 6th-year text and had practiced it because of course he had, and sat down cross-legged on the floor in front of the mirror, and let himself have the moment. When he stood up, 20 minutes later, his face was composed and his eyes were dry, and he put the experience in the place where he put things that mattered, not away, not forgotten, but integrated. Part of the structure. He came back the next night. He told himself it was to observe the mirror's mechanism more closely. The third night, he came back and Dumbledore was there. "I thought you'd come back," Dumbledore said, gently. He was sitting on a chair he'd apparently conjured, looking at the mirror with the expression of someone who had a long history with it. "Most people do." "It's compelling," Harry said, sitting down beside him without being invited. "Deliberately so, I think. The frame is a containment as much as an aesthetic choice." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "What do you see in it?" Dumbledore smiled. "Socks," he said. Harry looked at him. Dumbledore's eyes held the suggestion of something behind the answer, something true but not the complete truth, which was Dumbledore's preferred mode, and Harry filed it and let it go. "I found something," Harry said, which was not what he'd come to say but was what came out. "Under the trapdoor on the 3rd floor. I'm not going to do anything about it." Dumbledore was very still for a moment. "You found it." "3rd week of October," Harry said. "The protections are good. The mirror was the last layer. You put it here because someone who sees their heart's desire in a mirror will stand there until someone takes them away." He looked at Dumbledore. "Someone with no desires of their own would just reach past it." Dumbledore regarded him with an attention that was sharper than his expression suggested. "And what does that tell you?" "That you're protecting something for someone," Harry said. "And that you're also using the protection to learn something about anyone who gets this far." The silence stretched. "The Philosopher's Stone," Dumbledore said. "Nicholas Flamel," Harry confirmed. Another silence, different quality. Then Dumbledore said, quietly, "You know, you're either the most reassuring student I've ever taught, or the most alarming. I'm genuinely uncertain which." "Both, I think," Harry said, and stood. "The stone isn't safe here long-term. Whoever is after it is in this school. You should move it." "I'll take that under advisement," Dumbledore said, with the tone of a man who had already been considering it and had just been given sufficient evidence to confirm the decision. Harry walked to the door. Then he stopped, without turning around. "Professor." "Yes, Harry. The connection between me and Voldemort, I know it's there. I can feel it sometimes. Not constantly. But it's real." He paused. "I'm not afraid of it. I just wanted you to know that I know." He walked out, and left Dumbledore sitting in front of the mirror in the empty room, and felt the old man's attention following him down the corridor like a compass needle finding north, and knew, without needing to look back, that Dumbledore was revising every single thing he thought he understood about Harry Potter. Good. That was exactly what was supposed to happen. He sent the update to Winston that night, through the system they'd established, encrypted, routed through 3 Continental affiliates, arriving as a coded notation in a book Harry had ordered through a Diagon Alley shop with a high-table courier account. Winston's response came back in 12 hours, "Well done. Watch Quirrell. The stone moves by Christmas." Harry read it, burned it with a small wandless flame, and went to breakfast. Chapter 4, The Table Has Rules. The basilisk was 60 feet long and had eyes like 2 dying suns, and Harry's plan for dealing with it had exactly 4 steps. He stood at the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets in February of his 2nd year, the cold, wet stone of the pipe still on his hands, the smell of old water and something older underneath it, and reviewed the plan one more time with the calm efficiency of someone running a pre-operation checklist. Step 1, don't look at the eyes. Step 2, the sword. Step 3, the diary. Step 4, leave. It was a good plan. It had taken him 3 weeks to build it from the moment he'd found Hermione petrified in the hospital wing in November, fingers still curled around a mirror she'd been using to look around corners, a piece of paper in her other hand with 2 words on it, basilisk. Pipes. He'd sat beside her bed for a while. Not because it was strategically useful, it wasn't. He sat there because she was his friend and she was lying in a hospital bed with her eyes open and not seeing anything, and the sitting was the only thing available to him in that moment that wasn't violence, and he was saving the violence for later. Then he'd taken the piece of paper, memorized it, and gone to work. 3 weeks earlier, Lockhart's office had smelled of something aggressively floral and the man himself had been sitting behind his desk wearing an expression of performative concern that Harry had catalogued in the first 30 seconds as hollow all the way through. Gilderoy Lockhart was a very specific kind of dangerous, not capable, but celebrated, which in Harry's experience was often worse, because capability could be evaluated and celebrated could not. Harry, Lockhart said, with the warmth of someone who had practiced warmth to a professional standard without understanding what it was for. I've been meaning to have a word. About the chamber. I know you've been investigating, I've been gathering information, Harry said. Yes, well. Lockhart folded his hands with the air of a man about to deliver wisdom. There are channels for these things. The faculty has the situation under, what's in the chamber? Harry said. Lockhart blinked. I beg your pardon. The Chamber of Secrets. You wrote about a similar incident in your 4th book. The creature's description was consistent with a basilisk, though you changed several identifying details, which I assume was for the legal protection of whoever actually dealt with it before you took credit. Harry watched Lockhart's face go through several things in rapid succession, surprise, calculation, and then a very specific quality of blankness that was not innocence but its strategic deployment. I'm not interested in your book. I'm interested in the creature. I have no idea what you're, yes you do, Harry said, without heat, without accusation. I'm not going to tell anyone. I need the information. Lockhart's face settled into something more honest, which paradoxically made him more dangerous. A man with nothing to perform was a man who'd run out of options and knew it. It could be any number of creatures, he said, carefully. It moves through the pipes. It petrifies people rather than killing them when they see it indirectly. It killed a girl 50 years ago when she saw it directly. One of the petrified students, Justin Finch Fletchley, had reported hearing a voice in the walls. Harry pulled out his notes, not because he needed them but because it was useful to let people see the work. The pipes. The voice. The petrification versus death distinction. Basilisk. I just need to confirm the size. Lockhart looked at him across the desk with the expression of a man confronting something he hadn't prepared for. Large, he said, finally. Define large. A pause. Considerably larger than anything in the literature. Harry put the notes away. Thank you, he said, and stood. Potter, Lockhart started. Wick, Harry said, and left. Ron, predictably, wanted to come. No, Harry said. Harry, the chamber is accessed through Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, down a pipe into a tunnel system that has at least one fatal hazard we've already identified. I'm going in with a specific plan for a specific threat. Adding an unplanned variable doesn't improve the outcome. I'm not a variable, Ron said, with considerable feeling. You're the best chess player I've ever met, Harry said. You think about positions and sacrifice and 5 moves ahead better than anyone I know. But this isn't a chess problem. This is a room with a 60-foot snake and a possessed artifact, and I need to be able to move without thinking about where you are. Ron looked at him. I need you here, Harry said. When I come back with Ginny, someone needs to be at the pipe. He held Ron's gaze. You're the contingency. That's not a lesser role. Ron was quiet for a moment. Then, you'd better come back, is all I'm saying. I will. And Ginny too. Yes. Because if you don't, Ron stopped, jaw tight, and looked at the floor, which was Ron's way of managing the things he didn't have words for. "I know," Harry said. "I'll come back." He went alone. The chamber was everything the name promised and nothing the name prepared you for. It was vast, a cathedral of dark stone and green-lit water, serpents carved into every column, the ceiling lost in darkness above. The air was cold and old and tasted of stone and something mineral that Harry's nose told him was ancient blood, dried long ago into the rock itself. He moved through it in the silence he'd learned in the Continental's training rooms, the silence that wasn't just an absence of sound but an active quality, the silence of something that knows where it is. He had a rooster. This had been the logistical problem that took longest to solve. Basilisk vulnerabilities were three: a mirror, the cry of a rooster, and the venom of its own kind. The mirror was impractical for an active confrontation. The basilisk's own kind was unavailable. The rooster was the option. Getting a rooster into Hogwarts had required creative thought. Getting it into the chamber without it making noise at the wrong moment had required a silencing charm he'd applied with the particular care of someone who knew that one mistake in the application meant 60 feet of basilisk pointed at his face. He was 30 feet from the statue of Salazar Slytherin when he heard it. Not with his ears. With the thing in him that wasn't hearing, the part of him that had been resonating with the magical world since before he could walk, the part that the scar connected to. A pressure, old and absolute, the magical signature of something ancient and enormous waking up. Harry stopped. Closed his eyes. "Open your eyes," something said, in the hissing language that he hadn't known he knew until second year, when he'd spoken it at a dueling club demonstration and the entire hall had gone silent in a way that told him it was unusual. "Open your eyes, little speaker. I would see who dares." He kept his eyes closed. "I'd rather not," he said, in Parseltongue, and his own voice in the language still felt strange, fluid and strange, like speaking underwater. A silence. "Then, you speak." "Yes. I have not heard the tongue in 50 years. The sound of something enormous moving in water, somewhere ahead and to the left. The last speaker sent me a girl. Thin, frightened. She tasted of despair." Harry didn't let the image land anywhere useful. "Where is she?" "Behind the statue." A pause. "Why do you not open your eyes?" "Because I'd die," Harry said, "and then I'd have no one to talk to." A sound from the basilisk that was, impossibly, something like amusement. The pressure of its magical signature was overwhelming at this range, like standing next to something so old that its existence was a gravitational force. "You are not afraid." "I'm being careful," Harry said. "Those are different things." He had one hand on his wand and the other on the cage. He could hear the basilisk now with actual sound, the waterline disturbance, the weight of something colossal moving through an enclosed space, the particular acoustic of a room changing as something large occupied more of it. "The young man who sent me the girl," the basilisk said, and there was something in the voice now, not intelligence in the human sense, but awareness, ancient and specific. "He is not himself. There is something wearing him." "I know," Harry said. "He wanted me to kill all of them. Fill the school with death." A pause, and in the pause Harry heard something he hadn't expected, something that was not grief, exactly, but its cold, enormous relative. "I did not wish to. But I am old. And the old commands are deep." "Then I'm going to remove the thing commanding you," Harry said. "And you're going to help me." Another silence. Long enough that Harry began updating the plan, because a basilisk that decided not to cooperate was a different kind of problem entirely. "How?" the basilisk said finally. "Close your eyes." The sound of something vast and old doing something it had perhaps never been asked to do. Then, done. Harry opened his eyes. The basilisk was enormous, beyond enormous, the word became inadequate. It filled the chamber the way a river fills a valley, coiled and vast, its scales the color of old jade and deep water. Its eyes were closed, and with them closed it was just a snake, and Harry had made his peace with snakes when he was 6 years old and accidentally set one free at a Muggle zoo he'd been taken to by Continental staff on a rare day out. He crossed the chamber at a controlled run, keeping the basilisk in his peripheral vision, letting himself think about nothing except where his feet were landing. Ginny Weasley was behind the statue, exactly where the basilisk had said. Pale, cold, her pulse thread-like but present when Harry checked it. He didn't waste time on relief, he would feel that later, on the right side of alive. The diary was in her hand. Tom Riddle's shade materialized from the stone behind him, slow and deliberate, with the theatrical timing of someone who had spent 50 years rehearsing an entrance. Harry Potter, the shade said, in the smooth, careful voice of someone very young and very certain and almost entirely wrong about everything important. He was tall, dark-haired, handsome in the particular way that authority figures tended to be, and he looked at Harry with the recognition of someone seeing an opponent he'd been waiting for. "I've wanted to meet you." "Wick," Harry said, standing from checking Ginny's pulse. The shade tilted its head. "What?" "My name," Harry said. "Harry Wick." He looked at the diary in Ginny's hand. "You've been feeding on her for months." "She was a willing vessel," the shade said. "At first. Later, willing wasn't necessary." Harry looked at the shade the way he looked at problems he'd already solved and was now executing the solution to, with attention but without drama. "You know what you are," Harry said. "A memory. A fragment of a soul, stored in an object. Impressive magic, technically. Morally, it required something you took from her." He glanced at Ginny. "From everyone you've hurt." The shade's eyes had the quality of intelligence that knows it's being managed and hasn't decided yet whether to be offended. "And you're going to, what? Lecture me? You're 12 years old." "I'm going to destroy the diary," Harry said. "And then I'm going to carry her out of here." He paused. "You can try to stop me if you like." The shade raised its hand and the chamber went cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature, a magical cold, the cold of something that had once been a person draining the warmth from the air. Harry felt it the way he felt Voldemort's signature through the scar, that resonance, that distant kinship that still turned his stomach. He raised his wand. "Accio," he said, targeting the basilisk's fang he'd identified on the chamber floor 40 seconds ago, and the fang crossed the chamber and hit his hand hilt first and he was already moving. The shade tried to take him apart with the kind of magic that a 50-year-old memory of Tom Riddle had available, and it was considerable. The air cracked and darkened and the columns shed dust, and Harry moved through it the way he'd been taught to move through danger, not away from but through, never stopping, never freezing, keeping the objective in sight. He drove the basilisk fang into the diary. The effect was immediate, dramatic, and final. The shade screamed, a sound that was not entirely acoustic, and the chamber filled with black ink that bled from the diary like a wound, and then the shade was gone, and the silence after it was the deepest silence Harry had ever stood in. He released the silencing charm on the rooster cage. The crow filled the chamber. The basilisk shuddered, all 60 feet of it, and then went still, and its eyes opened, and they were just eyes, enormous and ancient and no longer lethal, something that had been in them departing with the shade that had held its old commands. "Free," it said, very quietly. Harry looked at it. He thought about the basilisk's choice, the closed eyes, the cooperation, the fact that it had been as trapped as Ginny in its own way. He thought about what Winston had said to him once, in the Continental bar over a mission brief: every system that produces monsters also produces prisoners. The work is knowing which is which before you pull the trigger. "Yes," Harry said, in Parseltongue. "Free." The basilisk regarded him with its enormous, opened eyes, and Harry didn't look away because the instant death factor appeared to have departed with the dark magic, and a basilisk that had just chosen to close its eyes rather than kill him deserved a return of directness. Then it lowered its head, slowly, to the chamber floor, with the gravity of something very old completing something it had been waiting a long time to complete. Harry picked up Ginny, took the fang, took the diary, and walked out. He cleaned himself up in Myrtle's bathroom before going to Dumbledore's office, which was practical. Showing up covered in ink and a 12-year-old's worth of exhaustion was an unnecessary disadvantage. The phone went into his bag. The diary he carried in his left hand. Dumbledore's office was occupied when Harry arrived. Lucius Malfoy was there, tall, coldly elegant, with the particular quality of aristocratic contempt that was its own kind of weapon, and beside him a house elf that Harry recognized immediately as Dobby, who had been attempting to protect Harry from the chamber all year in ways that were creative, disruptive, and structurally counterproductive. Fawkes was on his perch. Dumbledore was behind his desk with the contained, fierce expression of a man managing several things simultaneously. Malfoy looked at Harry in the doorway, at Ginny, who Harry had handed off to McGonagall in the corridor, then come up alone, and at the state of Harry's clothes and hands, which the bathroom cleanup had improved but not entirely resolved. "What happened?" Malfoy said, looking at Harry with the calibrated assessment of someone who understood exactly how dangerous unexpected competence was. Harry set the diary on Dumbledore's desk. "Your diary," Harry said, to Malfoy, because there was no point being indirect and he genuinely didn't have the patience for it. "Or rather, Tom Riddle's diary, which you gave to Ginny Weasley in Diagon Alley." He held Malfoy's gaze steadily. "I'd be curious what you were hoping would happen." The room went very quiet. Lucius Malfoy looked at the diary. He looked at Harry. He looked at Dumbledore, and in that glance Harry read the entire architecture of the situation, Malfoy's calculation, the assessment of exposure and risk, the decision running behind expensive features. "I don't know what you're implying," Malfoy said, with a smoothness that was genuinely impressive. "I'm not implying anything," Harry said. "I'm telling you what happened. Ginny Weasley was possessed by a memory of Tom Riddle stored in that diary. She's recovering in the hospital wing. The chamber is closed. The basilisk is no longer a threat." He paused. "The diary had your house elf's fingerprints on it, figuratively. And Dobby was in this school all year trying to keep me out of danger, which," he glanced at Dobby, who was frozen in an agony of conflicting loyalties, "suggests someone told him enough about what was in play that he felt the need to act." Dobby's enormous eyes were on Harry with an expression of desperate, terrified hope. Lucius Malfoy's face had gone through several controlled iterations of expression and arrived at cold fury, the fury of a man who was very dangerous and very intelligent and had just been outmaneuvered by a 12-year-old in a room full of witnesses. Harry picked up the diary. He handed it back to Malfoy. "I believe that's yours," Harry said. Malfoy took it, and his hand closed around it, and Harry watched the calculation complete. He was holding a destroyed dark artifact, in the headmaster's office, with Harry Wick looking at him with clear, direct eyes that said, "I know exactly what I just did." "Take your sock off," Harry said, to Malfoy. Malfoy stared at him. Harry looked at the diary. "It needs to be wrapped. You wouldn't want to get the ink on your robes." He held Malfoy's gaze with absolute composure. "Your sock, please." Fawkes made a sound. Dumbledore's eyes were very bright. Lucius Malfoy removed his sock with the icy deliberation of a man choosing his battles, and Harry wrapped the diary in it, and Malfoy gave it to Dobby, and Dobby held it and looked at his hand and understood. "You have given Dobby a sock," Dobby said, in a voice barely above a whisper. "Master has given Dobby a sock," Harry confirmed, watching Malfoy's face. What happened next was between Dobby and his own history, and Harry didn't watch it perform so much as register it, the house elf going straight-backed and free in an instant, the magic that had bound him releasing like a knot finally given slack. Malfoy looked at Harry with something that had moved past anger into a colder register. "You'll regret that," he said, very quietly. "Maybe," Harry said. "But not today." Lucius Malfoy left. The door closed, and the office was quiet, and Dumbledore looked at Harry across his desk with an expression that was doing too many things to name. "You planned that," Dumbledore said. "From the moment you came through the door." "I planned it from the moment I found Hermione in the hospital wing," Harry said. The Malfoy connection took 3 weeks to establish. The sock was improvised. Improvised, Dumbledore repeated. I thought about it in the corridor. Harry picked up his bag. The diary was a Horcrux. Dumbledore went very still. I know what they are, Harry said. I've read Secrets of the Darkest Art, Marguerite sourced a copy. The diary had the properties. He paused. Voldemort split his soul. The diary was one piece. I don't think it was the only one. The silence that followed had weight and temperature. No, Dumbledore said, finally. It was not. How many? I don't yet know precisely, Dumbledore said, and for the first time in any of their conversations, he sounded tired, not defeated, but carrying something. I'm working on finding out. Harry nodded. When you do, he said, I'd like to know. He said it the way he said most things, directly, without performing the ask. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, and in the look was the accumulated weight of all their conversations, of a man who had planned for a specific weapon and kept encountering a specific person instead, and was still, month by month, adjusting. Yes, Dumbledore said. I think you've earned that. The letter from Winston arrived via the usual channel the following week, 2 lines, the diary has been examined by our consultants. 5 more, minimum. The table is aware. Prepare accordingly, Harry read it. Burned it. He spent the evening in the common room with Ron and Hermione, Ron explaining the latest iteration of a chess problem he'd been working on and Hermione adding corrections with the affectionate precision she'd developed for Ron's blind spots and that Ron had learned to receive without being wounded by. The fire was warm and the room was full and Harry sat between them and thought about 5 more Horcruxes and a Dark Lord who wasn't fully gone and Dumbledore building a plan and the High Table watching from a distance with the interested patience of a very old institution that had seen this kind of thing before. And then he stopped thinking about it, because Ron had gotten the chess problem exactly right and was insufferably pleased about it, and Hermione was pretending not to be impressed, and this ordinary, unstrategic moment in a warm room with 2 people he hadn't planned on caring about, this was also real, and it was worth having, and he let himself have it. Sirius Black escaped from Azkaban in August, between 2nd and 3rd year, and the wizarding world responded the way it responded to most things, with headlines and fear and the assumption that the worst interpretation of every available fact was the correct one. Harry was at the Continental when the news broke, spending August the way he spent every summer, training in the mornings, theory in the afternoons, evenings with John and occasionally Winston and Sharon, the rhythms of the place settling back around him like something that fit. He'd grown 2 inches since September and his wand work had developed past what Marguerite could comfortably spar with, which she mentioned with a directness he appreciated and then sourced him a new sparring partner, a wizard named Callum who had been a hit wizard in Britain before coming to work with Continental affiliates, and who lasted 3 sessions before upgrading from coaching to genuinely trying. Harry was in the training room when Winston came to find him. Winston didn't come to the training room. When Winston needed Harry, he sent Sharon. That he came himself meant either the information was sensitive or he thought Harry's response required management, or both. Sirius Black, Winston said, from the doorway. Harry lowered his wand. He had 5 facts about Sirius Black already, his name from various historical texts on the First War, his imprisonment for killing 13 people including Peter Pettigrew, his connection to the Potters, and the fact that he was specifically connected to his history in a way that the broader wizarding world's criminals were not. He's your godfather, Winston said. Harry looked at him. He was your parents' closest friend, Winston continued, sitting on the bench with the deliberateness of someone who had given thought to how to have this conversation. He was their secret keeper, the person trusted with the location of the house in Godric's Hollow. He paused. He was convicted of betraying them to Voldemort. Harry processed this. Ran it against what he knew. You said, was convicted, he said. Not, did. Winston regarded him with the slight expression he wore when Harry got there faster than anticipated, which was the closest Winston came to showing surprise. I have some concerns about the conviction, Winston said. The British magical world has no presumption of innocence in their criminal proceedings. Their detention and trial processes are significantly below what any functional legal standard would require. Black apparently received no trial at all. He was imprisoned for 12 years without a trial, Harry said. Yes. For a crime he may not have committed. That is the question I've been looking into, Winston said. There's a third party. A man named Peter Pettigrew, listed as one of Black's victims, though no body was found beyond a finger. The circumstantial evidence, examined carefully, suggests that Pettigrew may have been the actual secret keeper. A pause. And that Pettigrew may still be alive. Harry sat down on the mat. He was sitting with the information, not reacting to it, just holding it, because Harry's first response to significant information was always to find its weight before he did anything with it. His godfather. A man who had loved his parents and been loved by them. 12 years in a prison that was by all accounts a place that removed everything from a person until only the most durable parts remained. 12 years for something he might not have done. He thought about John, who had walked into a ruined house and made a decision in the dark. He thought about the man downstairs at Godric's Hollow, standing between. I want to meet him, Harry said. He's escaped from the most secure prison in the wizarding world, Winston said. He's being hunted by their ministry and by dementors, creatures that are essentially ambulatory despair. He has no resources, no allies, and 12 years of Azkaban behind him. I know, Harry said. I still want to meet him. Winston looked at him steadily. He's also being assigned to Hogwarts, he said. As the new defense against the dark arts professor, which is either a coincidence or someone's plan. Given that Dumbledore made the appointment, I would not assume coincidence. Dumbledore knows he's innocent, Harry said. It wasn't a question. I believe so, Winston said. Or suspects it strongly enough to act as if he does. Harry stood. He'd made his decision in the time between sitting and standing, which was about how long most of his decisions took once he had the relevant information. I'm going back to Hogwarts with a new understanding of what the year is going to be about, he said. I'll need everything you have on Pettigrew. On your desk by morning, Winston said. He paused, and in the pause was the quality of restraint, something he wanted to add that he was considering whether to add. Then he said, he's your family, Harry. Whatever else is true or uncertain, that part is true. Harry looked at him. Something passed between them that wasn't anything that Winston would name in direct conversation, the particular kind of acknowledgement that two people who were both bad at the softer disclosures made between them. I know, Harry said. Same as you, same as John, same as Sharon. He picked up his wand. Just bigger. Winston almost smiled. He stood and straightened his jacket. John will want to be briefed. I'll tell him tonight. Winston nodded, moving to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame. The table has been watching the Dementor situation with considerable concern. The British Wizarding Ministry's use of them is excessive and politically complex. He didn't look back. There may be conversations at that level before the year is out. The High Table getting involved in wizarding politics, Harry said. The High Table has always been involved in wizarding politics, Winston said, with the precise tone of someone making an accurate correction. The wizarding world simply doesn't know it yet. He left. Harry stood in the training room for a moment longer, turning his wand in his fingers, thinking about a man he'd never met who had survived 12 years of a prison designed to break everything a person was made of, and who was still moving, still out there, which said something very specific about what Sirius Black was made of. He went to find John. He found him in the kitchen, which was where John existed in the evenings when he was at the Continental and not on a contract, cooking, usually, with the focused competence of someone who had learned to cook the way he'd learned everything, by deciding it was a skill worth having and acquiring it properly. Tonight it was a simple pasta, and John heard Harry come in and didn't look up. Winston talked to you, John said. Yeah. And? Harry sat at the kitchen table. Daisy came and put her head in his lap, which she did when she had assessed that something significant was happening. Harry put his hand on her. "He's my godfather," Harry said. John stirred the sauce. He didn't say anything for a moment, in the way John didn't say things when he was deciding what to actually say rather than what came automatically. "Yeah. Did you know? Before Winston told me just now." A pause. "I knew about him. James Potter's best friend. Listed as the betrayer." John set the spoon down. "I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure what was true and I didn't want to give you half a story." Harry looked at John's back. "And now?" "Now you know what I know," John said. He turned around, leaned against the counter, met Harry's eyes directly with the particular quality he had in serious conversations, present, no distance, none of the operational remove he wore the rest of the time. "He's probably innocent. He's definitely your blood. And you're going to do whatever you're going to do about that. Aren't you going to tell me to be careful?" "You're always careful," John said. "That's not the thing I'm thinking about." "What are you thinking about?" John was quiet for a moment. "Then, I'm thinking that you've had less of your original life than you were supposed to." He said it flatly, without self-reproach, but with a directness that meant he'd been thinking it for a while. "I walked out of that house with you and it was the right call. But it cost you something. Your history. The people who knew your parents the way nobody else did." He held Harry's gaze. "Sirius Black might be one of those people." Harry looked at him. "So go meet him," John said. "With your eyes open, like always. But go." Harry didn't say the thing that occurred to him, which was that John Wick telling him to go find his biological family without qualification or condition was the most significant thing John had ever said to him. He didn't say it because John didn't like those things named directly, and also because Harry understood, in the way he understood most things about the person who had raised him, that the not saying it was part of the point. "I'm going to need a Patronus," Harry said instead. "For the Dementors." "Is that hard magic?" "Extremely." "You'll have it by September," John said, turning back to the stove, and his voice had returned to its working register, and the conversation was over, and dinner was almost ready. "Yeah," Harry said. "I know." He sat at the kitchen table with his hand on Daisy and the sounds of the kitchen around him and the city 14 floors below, and thought about the man on the Hogwarts Express that September would put him in proximity to, a man who had survived the unsurvivable, who had loved the people who had chosen Harry first, who had spent 12 years losing everything and was still, somehow, moving. He thought he'd probably like him. He was usually right about people. Chapter 5, The Triwizard Convergence. The Goblet of Fire spat Harry's name out at 9:47 p.m. on a Thursday, and his first thought was not who did this but why now. He stood in the great hall with 700 people staring at him and Dumbledore holding the slip of parchment and the fire in the goblet dying back to blue, and he ran the relevant calculations in the time it took him to cross the hall to the door Dumbledore indicated. Someone had entered his name. The goblet was a binding magical contract. Refusing participation had consequences that the magical world took seriously enough that he'd read the relevant legislation twice during his Hogwarts research. Participation was mandatory once the goblet had spoken. So, he was in the Triwizard Tournament. The question was what to do with that. The champion's room was a stone antechamber with a fireplace and 3 other people who had all arrived already knowing they'd been chosen and were processing their certainty with the particular energy of people who had trained for exactly this outcome. Cedric Diggory, Hogwarts proper champion, a 7th year with good instincts and genuine decency that Harry had assessed during 3 years of observation, looked at Harry's entrance with surprise and a flash of something that wasn't quite suspicion but was adjacent to it. Fleur Delacour, Beauxbaton's champion, beautiful in the way that suggested at least partial Vila heritage and sharp in the way that suggested she found the beauty almost more trouble than it was worth, looked at Harry with genuine curiosity. Victor Krum, Durmstrang's champion, the best seeker in Europe at 17, looked at him with the evaluating attention of someone assessing an unknown variable. Harry looked at all 3 of them, catalogued them, and stood by the fireplace. The judges arrived in a crowd: Dumbledore, Bartemius Crouch, who ran the Department of International Magical Cooperation with the brittle precision of a man whose systems were the only things holding him together, Ludo Bagman, who had the relentless good humor of someone who had never fully updated from his own years of glory, and Alastor Moody, the new defense against the dark arts professor, who had arrived at Hogwarts in September and who Harry had been watching with careful, steady attention ever since. Moody was wrong. Not obviously wrong. Wrong in the specific way that things were wrong when something authentic had been replaced by something that was trying very hard to approximate the authentic, and almost succeeding. The real Alastor Moody, whose reputation Harry had researched thoroughly, whose methods and mannerisms were documented in ministry records that Winston's contacts had procured, was paranoid and aggressive and brilliant. The Moody who'd been teaching defense against the dark arts since September was paranoid and aggressive and brilliant, but the paranoia had a different texture. Real paranoia, born of decades of actual danger, had specific trigger patterns. It knew what it feared. This paranoia was broader, more performative, and occasionally misaimed in ways that suggested the catalogue of real threats hadn't been properly installed. Harry had been watching it since October. He hadn't mentioned it yet, because a suspicion without evidence was just a theory, and the moment he mentioned it he changed the information landscape, and changing the information landscape too early was an operational error John had drilled into him at age 9. Now, watching Moody watch him from across the antechamber, he made a note: accelerate the timeline on Moody. Harry, Dumbledore said, and the room's attention consolidated. Did you put your name in the goblet? No, Harry said. Did you ask an older student to do so? No. He met Dumbledore's eyes. Someone else did it. The why is more interesting than the who at this point. The room processed this. Crouch's expression went through 3 things in 2 seconds. Moody's magical eye swiveled toward Harry and then away. The contract is binding, Crouch said, in the tone of a man reciting law because the law was the thing he trusted when everything else was uncertain. All 4 champions must compete. I understand, Harry said. You'll be at a significant disadvantage relative to the other champions, Bagman offered, with the apologetic brightness of someone who was sorry about bad news but not quite sorry enough to do anything about it. They're all 3 years older than you, minimum. Harry looked at him. Right, he said, in a tone that indicated he had taken the information on board and found it mildly interesting. Fleur looked at Harry with slightly elevated interest. Crumb made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. He told Ron and Hermione that night in the common room, after the rest of the school had finished processing the announcement in the way the school processed most things, with noise, then more noise, then very specific noise directed at Harry. Ron had believed him immediately, which Harry had appreciated. Hermione had started making lists, which Harry had also appreciated, for different reasons. The first task is in November, Hermione said, quill moving. We don't know what it is. The champions aren't supposed to be told in advance, though historically there are always leaks, and historically Hogwarts staff have always had advance knowledge. It's dragons, Harry said. Ron stared. How do you know? Hagrid took me to see them last night. He'd followed Hagrid after dinner, which had required neither subterfuge nor persuasion. Hagrid moved through the castle with the comfortable assumption that he wasn't being followed, which made following him straightforward. 4 dragons. Norwegian ridgeback, Chinese fireball, Swedish shortsnout, and a Hungarian horntail. 1 per champion. Which one are you going to get? Hermione asked. The horntail, Harry said. Ron looked pained. How do you know that? I don't, Harry said. But it's the most dangerous one, and this tournament has been set up with my specific disadvantage in mind, which means whoever put my name in will have arranged the details where possible. He said it with the matter-of-fact composure of someone who has accepted an unpleasant probability and moved to planning around it. So I'll assume the horntail and prepare for that. Everything else will be comparatively manageable. Hermione put down her quill and looked at him with the expression she reserved for when Harry said something that made complete logical sense and also alarmed her. You're very calm about this. Getting uncalm doesn't change the dragon, Harry said. Ron, who had been quiet for a moment with the particular quality of silence that meant he was working through something, said, "What do you need?" "Information on horntail behavior. Spell research, specifically anything that affects a target's visual field, anything related to speed and aerial mobility, and summoning charms at extended range." He looked at them both. "And I need you to trust me when I say I have a plan I'm not going to share completely yet, because the fewer people who know the components the better." Hermione opened her mouth. "I'll tell you both everything after the first task," Harry said. "That's not me keeping secrets from you. That's me protecting the operational integrity of a plan that only works if it's not anticipated." Hermione closed her mouth. Looked at Ron. Ron shrugged with the equanimity of someone who had spent 3 years learning to trust Harry's judgment in situations where Harry's judgment had a consistent track record. "Books," Hermione said, and turned to her list. The first task was a horntail. Harry stood in the waiting tent with the small wooden dragon figurine in his hand. It had moved, when he'd reached into the bag, the way it was charmed to move, into the Hungarian horntail, and he'd held it and felt the gathered attention of the crowd outside and thought, "Good." The plan was clean. 4 elements: summoning charm for his broom, aerial mobility to remove himself from the horntail's optimal range, a distraction to draw the dragon's attention off the golden egg collection. What he hadn't planned for, because it wasn't possible to plan for everything, was the horntail recognizing that the broom was not a threat, and the collected crowd being 2,000 people in an arena built around the assumption that champions would be on foot, and the specific quality of attention that hit him when he stepped out of the tent. The crowd was enormous and loud, and the horntail was 60 feet of violence with a 70-foot wingspan and eyes like 2 operational hazards, and the egg was at the center of a nest that the dragon considered an extension of itself and defended with the totality of its attention. Harry raised his wand. "Accio Firebolt," he said, and put his full intent behind it, and felt the spell leave him like something exhaled, not strained, not effortful, just deliberate, the way most things were when he stopped managing them and simply did them. The firebolt came through the arena entrance at a speed that made the crowd noise change register. Harry caught it, mounted, and was airborne before the horntail had finished processing the source of the noise. What followed was approximately 4 minutes by Harry's internal count and felt, from the inside, like a very fast conversation with a very large animal that had absolute confidence in its own territory and was now being asked to reconsider. He flew with the specific focus of someone who was not performing for the crowd and was not afraid of the dragon and was simply working, reading the horntail's movement patterns, identifying the gaps in its reactive range, using the arena's updrafts the way May had taught him to use an opponent's momentum, as something that worked for him rather than against him. The crowd's noise became something he could read like a pressure change. It spiked when he went low, changed pitch when the horntail's fire came close enough that he felt the heat through his robes, and reached a sustained roar when he dove for the egg in the gap he'd opened by drawing the horntail's head left with a banishing charm on a rock from the arena wall. He pulled out of the dive with the egg under his arm at an altitude of 6 feet, leveled off, and came to a stop in the center of the arena. The crowd was on its feet. Harry looked at the egg. Then at the horntail, who was watching him with the specific quality of attention a large predator gives something that has just done something unexpected and hasn't decided yet whether to be offended. He looked at the handlers moving in from the arena edges. The scorecards went up. 9, 9, 10, 9, 10. Harry tucked the egg under his arm and landed and walked back into the tent, and the noise followed him in like weather. Cedric Diggory was waiting in the tent, having finished his own task. He'd used a transfiguration that was elegant and showed genuine tactical imagination. He looked at Harry with an expression that had moved past the initial uncertainty of 4 weeks ago into something more direct. "That was," Cedric said, and paused, clearly revising whatever he'd started to say. "That was not what I expected from a 14-year-old. "People keep saying that," Harry said. Cedric almost smiled. "How'd you know to use the summoning charm?" "I worked backward from the constraint," Harry said. "The dragons were the given. The constraint was aerial mobility. The summoning charm for the broom was the solution that addressed the constraint most directly. Cedric looked at him for a moment. You worked backward from the constraint, he repeated. During the briefing, at 14. 13, technically, Harry said. I won't be 14 until July. Cedric shook his head slowly. We should probably be on the same side, he said. We are on the same side, Harry said. The tournament doesn't require anyone to hurt each other. The tasks have individual solutions. Cedric considered this, and something in his expression settled, the last of the uncertainty replaced by a decision. Agreed, he said, and held out his hand. Harry shook it. The second task was the lake. Harry solved it in 6 days with Hermione's help, the golden egg screaming becoming a clue once he opened it underwater in the prefect's bathroom, the merpeople's song revealed, the gillyweed sourced through a house elf network that Harry had been quietly maintaining since his interaction with Dobby in second year. He spent the rest of the month working on 2 other problems. The Moody problem was the first. He'd narrowed it down by December. The real Moody's known associates included no one currently at Hogwarts. His documented behavioral patterns in the field diverged from the current Moody in 13 specific instances Harry had catalogued, and the Marauders map, which Fred and George Weasley had given him in third year in exchange for what Harry had accurately described as an ongoing professional courtesy, and which he'd been using ever since as a castle intelligence resource, showed Moody's office as containing 2 magical signatures at certain hours of the night. One moved. One didn't. He shared this with Dumbledore at their January meeting. He'd established monthly meetings with the headmaster in third year, framed as academic consultations, actually functioning as information exchanges in which both parties gave roughly equivalent value and both parties knew it. Dumbledore listened to the 13 divergences. He looked at the map data Harry had written out and brought with him. His expression didn't change, but the quality of the stillness around him shifted, the stillness of someone who had suspected something and was now moving from suspicion to certainty. The trunk, Dumbledore said, quietly. The magical signature that doesn't move, Harry agreed. I'd guess a 7-lock trunk. Real Moody is inside it. That would make our current defense professor, a Death Eater, Harry said. Polyjuice potion. Someone who knows the real Moody well enough to maintain the performance. He paused. And someone who put my name in the goblet. And who almost certainly knows what the final task will contain. The silence in the office had the quality of something crystallizing. If I move on this now, Dumbledore said, carefully, we lose the intelligence value of knowing who's pulling the strings. Bartemius Crouch Jr., Harry said. Dumbledore went very still. Crouch Sr. has been deteriorating all year, Harry said. His public appearances have been reduced and his correspondence has had inconsistencies that read like someone else writing it. Crouch Jr. was convicted as a Death Eater and sent to Azkaban. There's no official record of his death there, only his father's later testimony that he died in prison, which his father would have had both motive and opportunity to falsify. He held Dumbledore's gaze. The polyjuice needs replenishment every hour. Crouch Jr. drinks from the hip flask. I've been timing the intervals since October. The portraits on the walls were all awake. Fawkes was very still on his perch. Dumbledore looked at Harry with an expression that had passed through several iterations and arrived at something that was not quite wonder but lived in the same neighborhood. You've been building this case since October, Dumbledore said. Since September, Harry corrected. October was when I had enough to be confident. And you waited until now to tell me. I needed to know the full shape of the plan, Harry said. Moving too early changes the shape. I needed to know what the final task was going to be. And do you? A maze, Harry said. And at the center of the maze, a portkey. And whoever takes the portkey gets transported to wherever Voldemort's resurrection has been arranged. He said it with the same composure he said everything, and Dumbledore's expression absorbed it with the same practiced containment. The plan has been to get me to that location alone. How did you determine the final task? I asked the maze, Harry said, which was not entirely accurate but was accurate enough. He'd been talking to the castle through the strange, wordless communication he'd developed with Hogwarts over 4 years, and the castle had, in its way, answered. And I read the tournament's historical precedents. The pattern indicated an enclosed environment with multiple hazards. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the castle, a clock struck 9. "What do you want to do?" Dumbledore asked. And it was a genuine question, not rhetorical, not leading, the question of someone who had finally accepted that the person across from him was making decisions of his own. "I want to go," Harry said. Dumbledore stared at him. "To the graveyard, or wherever it is," Harry said. "I want to see what Voldemort's resurrection looks like and what he's working with and what the situation is. I want that intelligence." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "And I want Crouch Jr. arrested here before I go, so the operational support he'd provide to the resurrection is cut off." "Harry," Dumbledore said, with a quiet weight. "A full resurrection of Voldemort needs to happen eventually," Harry said. "Or he exists in half-states indefinitely, which is actually worse strategically. A fully resurrected Voldemort can be dealt with as a fixed target. A fragmentary one is an ongoing environmental hazard." He paused. "And I need to see him. The connection between us, the scar. I need to understand it in his presence." Dumbledore looked at him for a very long time. "You're 14 years old," he said. "Yes," Harry agreed. "This plan is, I know." "I can't, Professor," Harry said, and his voice was quiet and certain and entirely without drama. "I've known this was coming since I was 9 years old and John told me Voldemort wasn't completely gone. I've been preparing for it. Not for the performance of it, not for the symbolic narrative of it, for the actual event." He held Dumbledore's eyes. "I'm not asking for your permission. I'm telling you what I'm going to do because you need to know and because arresting Crouch Jr. tonight is something I can't do without your involvement." Another long silence. "Crouch Jr., Dumbledore said finally, standing. "Tonight." "Yes." "And the final task, you participate." "Yes." "And when you reach whatever's at the center of that maze, I'll come back," Harry said. "With everything I've learned." He called Winston before the final task. Not from the castle, from Hogsmeade, the morning of the task, where he'd gone under the invisibility cloak that had been his father's and that Dumbledore had given him in first year with the quiet significance of a man returning something that had waited long enough. He used the encrypted channel, a specific sequence through a Hogsmeade shop whose proprietor was a Continental affiliate, and Winston picked up in 2 rings. "The graveyard tonight," Harry said. "I know," Winston said. "You know the location?" "Little Hangleton. We've had it under surveillance for 6 weeks. There's been activity, Death Eater movement, magical construction, someone has been preparing that site for something significant." A pause. "I have people positioned." "Pull them back," Harry said. "Before midnight. I need the site clean of our people when I arrive or the intelligence value is compromised. Harry, if our people are there and something goes wrong, the response changes the nature of the event. I need to see the resurrection as it would happen without intervention." He said it with the composure that came not from not caring but from having made the calculation fully and accepted the cost. "Pull them back to the perimeter. 2 miles minimum. If I'm not out in 90 minutes, then they can move." A silence that had specific texture, Winston managing something he didn't want to manage. "John is in London," Winston said. "I know. Don't tell him yet." "Harry." "Tell him after," Harry said. "If I tell him before, he'll come, and John and Little Hangleton tonight is a variable I can't account for." He paused. "Tell him after, and tell him I said to trust me." A very long pause. 90 minutes, Winston said. "Not 91. "Understood." He went back to the castle and ate dinner and sat with Ron and Hermione and answered their questions about the maze with the focused calm of someone who was not doing a difficult thing but simply preparing to do the next thing on a list. Hermione looked at him across the dinner table with the specific look she developed in 4 years of knowing him, the one that meant she knew he was managing something she didn't have the complete picture for, and she was deciding whether to push. She decided not to push. She reached across the table and briefly, quickly, put her hand over his, and then went back to her dinner. Ron passed him the bread without being asked. Harry looked at the two of them, Hermione reading with one hand, Ron eating with the cheerful efficiency of someone who had never fully trusted silence, and felt something that was clean and real and worth carrying into a graveyard. The maze was a problem set. Harry moved through it with his wand out and his attention fully extended, reading the magical environment the way the castle had taught him to read it, the shifts in pressure that indicated a creature ahead, the cold spots that meant a curse had been laid into the hedge walls, the particular sound of bewitched ground that Hermione had described from her research and that he now recognized as she'd said he would. He passed a blast-ended scrut with a banishing charm and a turn that put a hedge wall between them. He dissolved the Sphinx's riddle in 30 seconds, which the Sphinx acknowledged with a precision that suggested it had been waiting for someone who'd actually try. He navigated the imperious curse laid into the northwest quarter by moving through it fast enough that it didn't have time to settle, a technique that only worked if you knew it was coming, which he had. The cup was in the center. Cedric was there too, arriving from the east corridor as Harry came in from the north, and they looked at each other across the cup with the mutual awareness of two people who had agreed to something in October and were now at the execution point of it. Together? Cedric said. Harry looked at the cup. He looked at Cedric, who was 19 and good and genuinely deserved this win more than Harry had ever needed it. He thought about the portkey and little Hangleton and the plan that required him to arrive at the graveyard and see what was there. Cedric, he said. Don't touch the cup. Cedric stared at him. What? It's a portkey, Harry said. To somewhere bad. I need to go. You don't. He held Cedric's gaze with the directness that was his standard. Take the cup. Win the tournament. You've earned it. Cedric looked at the cup. He looked at Harry. He processed the statement, the specificity of it, the certainty, with the intelligence Harry had always credited him with. How bad? Cedric said. Voldemort-level bad, Harry said. And you're going anyway? Yes. Cedric looked at him for a long moment. You're insane, he said, with a sort of flat wonder. Probably, Harry agreed. Touch the cup, Cedric. Cedric looked at him one more time. Then he reached out and took the cup, and the portkey activated, and Harry saw the flash of Cedric disappearing back to the arena, heard the distant roar of the crowd, and stood alone in the center of the maze. He reached into his jacket. Took out the modified portkey that Dumbledore had prepared, keyed to little Hangleton, or more precisely to the magical signature emanating from little Hangleton that their surveyors had identified and locked. He held it. He thought about John at the kitchen table with lock picks and 2 hours of patience. He thought about Winston in the lobby at 2 a.m. with his pressed suit and his plan already running. He thought about Marguerite on the sitting room floor with her leather case. He thought about Sirius, who had survived what couldn't be survived and was still moving, who had turned up in the Hogwarts grounds in 3rd year and been the person Harry had expected him to be, not perfect, not whole, but genuine, entirely genuine, with nothing left to spend on pretense. He thought about his parents, standing between. He activated the portkey. Little Hangleton Graveyard had the specific quality of a place that had been waiting. The yew trees were old and dense and the graves were old too, the inscriptions worn smooth, and in the center of it a cauldron that was not the chemistry of potions but the chemistry of something older, fire beneath it, steam rising, and around it Death Eaters in a ring that opened as Harry landed on his feet, already moving. Wormtail was there. Harry had a specific and very controlled set of feelings about Peter Pettigrew that he'd organized over the course of 3rd year when the truth of Sirius's innocence had solidified. He looked at Pettigrew with the composite attention of someone cataloging a resource's capabilities and threats simultaneously, and what he saw was a man held together by fear and service and the particular cowardice that was not an absence of intelligence but intelligence entirely in service of self-preservation. Pettigrew looked at Harry like a man looking at something he'd been told about and wished he hadn't been. "He'll want to speak to you," Pettigrew said, in the direction of the cauldron. "I imagine so," Harry said. What happened next was the darkest magic Harry had ever been in proximity to, the kind that didn't just affect the world but reached into the structure of things and rearranged them at a level below physics. Bone and blood and flesh, and a figure rising from the cauldron with the cold deliberateness of something returning from somewhere it had never fully left. Voldemort. He was tall and pale and wrong in the specific way that things that have been partially unmade and remade are wrong, too much of the form and not quite enough of the content, a copy that was slightly off true in ways that were subtle individually and cumulatively unmistakable. His eyes were red, which was not a human color, and his face had the structure of someone who had restructured it by choice and by force until it no longer remembered what it had been before. He looked at Harry. Harry looked at him. The scar activated, not the pain of a wound, but the resonance of the connection, the specific frequency of it, the thing that had been there since Godric's Hollow that Harry had been examining and learning and mapping since he was old enough to know it was there. He felt it now not as a threat but as information. The connection ran both ways. It always had. "Harry Potter," Voldemort said, with the particular satisfaction of someone completing a long-anticipated sequence. His voice was cold and precise and accustomed to being listened to. "Voldemort," Harry said. He didn't add anything. He didn't perform anything. He stood on the grass of Little Hangleton graveyard surrounded by Death Eaters and looked at the man the wizarding world had built a mythology around, and what he felt was not fear, not awe, but the clean focused attention of someone reading a situation they've prepared for. Voldemort tilted his head. "You're not afraid," he said, and there was something in the observation, not admiration, but something adjacent to curiosity. Even Voldemort, apparently, was capable of encountering the unexpected. "No," Harry said. "You should be." "Maybe," Harry said. "Let me ask you something." The Death Eaters around the ring shifted. Voldemort's expression moved through mild surprise into the particular expression of someone who has controlled every room they've ever been in encountering a room that isn't quite cooperating. "The Horcruxes," Harry said. "You made 7. The diary is destroyed. The ring," he watched Voldemort's face, reading it, "you haven't checked the ring recently, have you?" He held the red gaze steadily. "Dumbledore has been busy." The shift in Voldemort's expression was brief and contained and absolutely real, a flash of something that was not quite alarm but was its neighbor. "Crucio," Voldemort said, with the reflexive authority of someone reaching for their primary tool. Harry moved, not away, sideways, rotating out of the curse's path with the controlled footwork of 4 years of maze training, feeling the edge of it as heat along his left arm, and came up with his wand extended and said Expelliarmus, because it was the spell he was best at and he was in a graveyard surrounded by Death Eaters and his objective was intelligence gathering and exit, not a duel. Voldemort caught his wand hand. The graveyard went quiet. "You disarmed me," Voldemort said, very softly. The wand was back in his hand from wherever it had landed in half a second. A 14-year-old boy. In a graveyard. Surrounded by my Death Eaters. He looked at Harry with red eyes that were doing something more complicated than simply seeing. "Who are you?" "Harry Wick," Harry said, for the 10,000th time, and meant it the most he ever had. What followed was a duel, not the dueling competition variety, not the practice sparring variety, but the genuine article, the kind that had stakes and moved fast and required everything simultaneously. Voldemort was as powerful as his reputation suggested and considerably more precise than his mythology allowed for. He was a technician, his spells efficient and purposeful, no wasted motion. He fought with the arrogance of someone who had never genuinely lost, which was both his strongest quality and his most exploitable one. Harry fought the way he'd been taught to fight everything, reading forward, using the environment, staying 3 moves ahead of the move he was making. The graveyard's graves provided cover. The Death Eaters stayed back. Voldemort's presence made it clear this was his fight and their participation was not desired. The yew tree's limited angles. Harry used all of it. The connection between their wands hit at 11:23 p.m. precisely, priori incantatem, the golden thread of Expelliarmus meeting the red light of Avada Kedavra, and the result being something neither of them had caused intentionally, a phenomenon that ran along the line of power between them and opened into something that Harry had only read about in theory but felt immediately, the spectral echoes of the wand's prior victims rising from the beam. He held it. Not because he had to. Because the echoes included his parents, and he gave them the 30 seconds they were there for, and he felt the woman with red hair and green eyes put her hand on his shoulder for one moment that wasn't real and was completely real, and he thought, I know. I'm going. He broke the connection. He cast smokescreen charm toward the Death Eater ring, accounted for Pettigrew in the chaos, a stunner dropped Pettigrew cleanly, and ran for the perimeter, running the way he'd been taught to run from bad situations, fast and low and directionally unpredictable, and he counted and found the marked stone he'd keyed the emergency port key Dumbledore had given him to, and grabbed it. The graveyard disappeared. He landed on the Hogwarts grounds, hard, grass and cold air, and lay on his back for a moment and looked at the stars and did an inventory. Left arm, heat burn from the cruciatus edge, manageable. Right shoulder, scraped against a gravestone at some point, bleeding but not structural. Everything else functioning. He had what he'd come for. The scar resonance, the information in it, the map of what connected them and what that connection meant. The Horcruxes, and Voldemort's response to having them mentioned. The Death Eaters' faces, names added to his mental catalogue. The full nature of the resurrection magic and what it required and what it cost. Voldemort was back. Harry sat up. Dumbledore was there, which meant Dumbledore had been watching from the edge of the wards, which meant Dumbledore was more capable of sitting on his concern than Harry had given him credit for. The headmaster crouched beside him with his robes around him and his blue eyes doing the thing they did when he was looking at Harry and seeing more than he'd planned on seeing. Well? Dumbledore said. He's back, Harry said. Physically, fully. He'll need time to consolidate, the resurrection magic takes a toll and he won't move publicly for at least several months. He sat up properly, taking the arm Dumbledore offered, getting to his feet. The Horcruxes, I mentioned them. His response confirmed there are at least 2 more beyond the diary. He didn't know one had been compromised, which means his intelligence on Dumbledore's activities is incomplete. Which gives us an advantage, Dumbledore said. A temporary one, Harry said. He's going to be building his network very quickly. The Death Eaters in that graveyard, I have faces and names for 14 of them. I'll write them up tonight. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. The Ministry isn't going to believe any of this. No, Dumbledore said, quietly. They won't. So we work around them. Yes. Dumbledore looked at him, the long, complex, accumulated look of a man who had built a plan around a symbol and found instead a person, and was still, for years in, processing what that meant. Are you hurt? Manageable, Harry said. Harry. And there was something in how Dumbledore said it, not the headmaster's voice, not the strategist's voice, but something older and more tired. I'm sorry. That this is what your life requires of you. Harry looked at him. It's what I chose to do tonight, he said. That's different. He paused. I'm sorry for the people who didn't get the choice. They walked back to the castle in the June dark, and Harry thought about Winston's 90-minute window and the perimeter 2 miles out and the people Winston had pulled back and the trust that required from a man who did not extend trust lightly. He thought about John, who he told Winston to tell after. He thought about John's face when he found out, and the specific quality of that face, not anger, not fear, but the look John got when something had happened that he couldn't put himself between, and he had to sit with that, and he did sit with it, because John Wick was better at the things that mattered than almost anyone Harry had ever met. He was going to have to apologize for the after-the-fact notification. He'd thought about that. He'd do it directly and without hedge, the way John had taught him to do everything. He sent the message to Winston from the infirmary, where Madame Pomfrey was dealing with the arm with the focused disapproval of a woman who had been dealing with Harry's injuries for 4 years and had opinions about the trend line. Winston's response came back in 1 hour and 12 minutes, received. Well done. John says, we'll talk. WPS. The High Table convened an emergency session at midnight. They're aware. Expect a call. Harry read it, and felt something he didn't name move through him, not relief, because this wasn't over, and not satisfaction, because the cost of tonight was real and ongoing. Something more like clarity. The kind that comes when you've moved through the theoretical into the actual and found that your preparation was sufficient and your choices were yours. He lay in the infirmary bed and looked at the ceiling and heard Madame Pomfrey moving about in the next room and thought about what came next. The war was coming. It had always been coming. But it was going to come to him on ground he'd chosen, at a time he'd helped shape, with people he'd chosen beside him. That was enough. He closed his eyes. He slept.